So, but you know, all dear speakers, if you would like, you know, to just, I mean, make flexible your speech. I mean, if this written on my paper title of your speech is not precisely expressing what do you like to say, then, you know, do not be afraid, just, I mean, choose your way. So, Excellency, be so kind to speak, and floor is yours. And me as a chairman, I have a duty to just watch on the, I mean, check the time. So you have for your first speech just dedicated 15 minutes. So, Excellency Ambassador, be so kind, you know, go ahead with your speech.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. Do you hear me clearly? The sound is good, image is good. Hope so. So again, thank you very much for this invitation, and dużo zdrowia to everybody.
Dziękujemy.
Dziękujemy.
Special word of thanks goes to you, Mr. Moderator, Pan Professor Zbigniew Fisiak, for your invitation. You have persuaded me.
Okay, thank you. Now it's okay.
It's okay. So thank you very much for having persuaded me to take part in this debate. I would like to commend the Institute Myśli Schumana for this initiative, for this series of debates that you have pointed out are going to take place during the whole year, 12 debates. I'm pretty sure that this will be a substantial contribution to the conference on the future of Europe, a conference to which my country, Spain, is very much committed. We are encouraging the participation of citizens, of think tanks, of the academy. And in fact, this is a very good example of participation in this important debate for our sake, for the sake of all of us, European citizens, and for the sake of our dear European Union. Professor, you have underlined that you have proposed that I should try to answer to a question named.
Excellency, your microphone. Switch on your microphone. Yes, now it's okay.
Now it's okay. I think so. I should perhaps. I was thanking you and telling you that I think that this is a substantial contribution, this initiative, to the conference on the future of Europe, a conference to which my country, Spain, is very much committed. It's important for the sake of the European citizens and for the sake of the future of our dear European Union. So congratulations for this initiative.
Thank you very much.
Suggested that I should try to answer, a very interesting question. How would Schuman shape the European Union today? Well, in fact, I guess that you should know the answer better than me. After all, you claim to be the Institute of Schuman's Thought. I'm not, but I thank you very much for the suggestions, and it will, I'm very grateful for it. It will allow me to say some words about Robert Schuman and about his legacy. Well, Robert Schuman is one of the founding fathers of the European Union. And in fact, Schuman is one of the figures that for us Europeans today should be, close to our hearts and close to our thoughts. As a matter of fact, Robert Schuman had an ideology, but his work, his legacy, has gone beyond the original ideology, and that's something that all of us Europeans should be proud to be part of. So there is a place for all of us, and a sort of rond-point Schuman. We should be grateful to this great figure, and all of us should be devoted to it and recognize his merits. Schuman was a man of faith, of hope, of reason, of study, and one of his inspirations was Thomas Aquinas. That was one of his sources of inspiration. And I would like to mention some of the characteristics of a person of the Academy from the US, Peter Kreeft, that has underlined about Thomas Aquinas. Peter Kreeft said that Aquinas, Thomas's, his traits are clarity, depth, contemporaneity, modernity, truthfulness, common sense, and pragmatism. If I bring this traits that are said about Aquinas to this forum, is because I think that all of them are attributable to Robert Schuman. We can take, for instance, one of his most renowned or famous sentences that deals with Europe. He said that Europe will not be made at one go, nor in an overall construction. It will be made through concrete achievements that create real solidarity. Well, I think that this sentence is really clear and profound at the same time. It's contemporary. I mean, it was said after the World War II, so something had to be done in order to put Europe back on track after the scourge of World War II. The whole continent was destroyed. Something had to be made, something different from the experiences, historic experiences that Europe has had. It was modern, because it was something new, something that had not been tried before, truthful, namely honest and thoughtful, and really nobody could discuss that this is a sentence or an approach that is very commonsensical and pragmatic. I think all these characteristics are in this sentence. So we have a person, Schuman, that really found an interesting and very productive approach to the challenges of Europe at that crossroads after World War II. 60 years after Robert Schuman's death, this approach, we can ask ourselves, and I think this is the purpose of, the question that you have put directly to me. Is this approach still valid? Well, I think that experience has shown that this approach has worked. And I would even dare to say that it has worked beyond the most merry and bright expectations of Robert Schuman himself. What have we had in the last 60 years? Schuman died in '63. Well, when he died, the European Union was it was not even a union as such. I mean, the European community, economic community, was a club, so to speak, of 6 members. Now we are 27. And after that, we have had many, say, achievements in this club. The single market, cohesion, European citizenship, the area of freedom, security, and justice, the euro, progress in security and defense, just to mention some of them. Of course, there are also flaws, and there are setbacks. I mean, Brexit is clearly one of those. There's the barriers to our single market, the budget. Some Europeans think it's insufficient. The European arrest warrant does not work, perhaps the way it should work. There are flaws there. There are fiscal disaccords, and there are hesitations as far as the security and defense construction is concerned. So it's not a permanently ascendant line. Well, there are ups and downs, but still, Schumann's recite this solidarity in the facts, this step-by-step or gradual approach has proved to successful. So, in my view, I would say that we should keep it and, try to continue building Europe according to this recite. In order to also to avoid confusion, in order to avoid that this building of us is not doesn't fall into the confusion of Babel, and so that we can make steps always in the right direction, but without rush, without precipitation. Europe is a work of generations. It's been a work of generations. It's going to be a work of generations. In the last years, we have had, as I said, a lot of things that are very positive. And just to mention something positive that is very recent, I would put in this on this part of our balance, the Accords of December regarding, the Recovery Fund and the multi-annual framework. The context was not easy. The internal strains were clearly present. We know that, us who are in Poland. But at the very end, there was an agreement. This agreement should be very positive to recover from the negative and deep negative effects of COVID. And it's, as I'm saying, a recent example. But in the last 30 years, we have had treaties of Maastricht, Amsterdam, Nice, although this was a treaty that finally didn't fly. Another example of a treaty that didn't fly is the Constitutional Treaty. And at the very end, the Lisbon Treaty, and this debate is also the Lisbon Treaty. So things are quite different today from what they were 30 years ago, and different in the positive term. What about enlargement? I mean, there have been in the last 30 years 4 enlargements, and one contraction, Brexit, but I would say the result or the final balance is very positive in my view. So the European Union is far from being completed. As I said, it's a challenge for generations, and we asked today, we have our task and our responsibilities. Geographically is not finished. Of course, there are candidates that have the legitimate aspiration to join European Union, everything has to be wait and be ripe at the same time. We have also to digest successes, which is something that is not necessarily done from one day to the following. And of course, from the vertical or architectural point of view, Europe is also far from being completed. So Schuman is one of the architects that has put the foundations of our family after World War II. There were others, Monet, Adenauer, de Gasperi, Spaak, and I would like to finish with a comparison. I mean, European Union, coming from Spain, could be sort of compared to its very famous building, the Holy Family Basilica in Barcelona. Antonio Gaudí was the architect. It's still unfinished. It's still something that has to be completed. It's already a beautiful thing, this basilica, a beautiful building that inspires all of us. When we look at it, we feel sort of inspired, I'm saying. We cannot forget it's finished, but well, there will be years where we can make more progress, and in other years, perhaps the wisest thing is to go slowly in order to avoid faux pas, in order to avoid that we make a step that at the very end is counterproductive. One of the really good things that all of us European citizens have to enjoy of our European Union, we are privileged to have a union that is a union of rule of law, a union where each and every citizen has his or her rights and liberties guaranteed with several instances, so that at the very end, if at the national level he or she doesn't get the recognition of the right that he or she is claiming, this recognition may be acknowledged at EU level. And this is really a privilege. We have this too, of course, in the Council of Europe, which is a wider family, but foremost and before, we have this within the European Union. We have a charter of rights, fundamental rights, that all of us are really enjoying this fact. So we cannot complain. We cannot, of course, sit down and just think that the work has been done, because the work, a lot of work has been done, and many things are still pending. And well, my I would say message today would be that we should be committed to continuing with this construction of the European Union, a union of states, member states, and citizens, which is very important. And this is something that really is not comparable in other parts of the world. We are sometimes too negative towards ourselves. So don't be too negative, but let's keep the ambition. And with this ambition, we would be sort of good heirs of Mr. Robert Schuman, who is one, as I said, of our founding fathers, and we have I would say the need to recognize this, because I mean he was really instrumental to put Europe finally on track after many years of wars that almost destroyed our continent and the people who lived in our continent. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Excellency. And soon I will come to you with some additional questions to extend your speech. But first of all, now I ask for a speech, Professor Attila Kovacs, And the topic we put for your speech is how the Lisbon Treaty changed the interinstitutional power balance in the European Union legislation, and winners and losers. So we appreciate your consideration about that topic. Go ahead, floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes, I hear you very well.
Perfect. Dzień dobry. Polaki, Węgry, kto dwaj bratanki i dobitki do szklanki. How is my Polish?
Yeah, very good, very good.
That's all. First of all, thank you very much for the invitation, and congratulations to this series of events. I'm happy to participate. As you have heard in the introduction, I work for the Center for Fundamental Rights, which is a think tank, legislative EU policies think tank in Hungary. And I'm also working at a Hungary university as an associate professor. My main research area is the European Parliament and the legislation of the European Parliament, I can say so. I have prepared some slides, but I prefer to talk maybe like freely. And I need to say some striking points for this dog behind me not to steal the show. And I'm aware of that. Let me start with the context, what I see. When the Treaty of Lisbon was signed in 2007 and entered into the force at the end of 2009, how was the journey in these 12 years and how significantly the political, economic, and social landscape changed in Europe? The first thing that I would like to say is that 2007 was, I mean, in and 3 years after the big boom enlargement of the European Union. So there was some sort of, how to say, euphoria, some sort of positive way of thinking when it was signed. And now I will show you how significantly different change or things happened in the last 12 years. For example, before the entry into force of the Lisbon Treaty in 2008, in September, the Lehman Brothers company went into bankrupt, and the whole economic situation in the global economy and, of course, in the European economy changed. Then, the implication of this also started at the end of 2009, the Greek Eurozone crisis. It also determined a lot, and when we are talking about the institutions and institutional setup and the capability of European institutions to deal with the challenges that the European Union and the European citizens are facing, the Greek Eurozone crisis was an important milestone. Then 2015, the migration crisis, which in my personal view is still unsolved, and there are unspoken issues in relation to migration as a challenge to the European Union. 2016 and since 2016, the Brexit. We already touched upon the issue of Brexit, which is a very unfortunate development for the European integration. Then 2020, the COVID crisis and all this coronavirus issue in the last more than 1 year, or let's say the last year. So these are the key milestones that I would like to define in the last 12 years. They fundamentally changed the political landscape in which the Lisbon Treaty was signed. And additionally, let me tell you one additional thing, and this is the enlargement fatigue. So we don't see any more enlargement in the forthcoming years of the European Union. It's, I can say, also a declared policy that there will be no enlargement. So today the situation is very much different than it used to be in 2007 and 2009. Let me talk about now the three institutions and how I see the main changes in the role of the three European institutions in the last 12 years. Let me start with the European Commission. more and more the European Commission became, instead of the guardian of the treaties, so instead of this role, it became more and more proactive in the European political arena. I think since Jean-Claude Juncker, it was a defined, and it is the same for Ursula von der Leyen's commission, that it should be a political commission. They say that it's a political commission, not only the guardian of the treaties. Soft law, which is, in my view, is contradictory to the Lisbon Treaty, soft law became the main tool in the hands of the European Commission to gradually increase the power of the Commission, in many, many cases to the detriment of the member states, of the nation states. There is a conflict, political conflict, in this understanding of the role of the European Commission, whether it should be a political commission or the guardian of the treaties. It's a question that should be answered in the coming years, maybe in the framework of the Future of Europe conference. And two more points here regarding the Commission. I consider the Commission not only a political commission, but a political and ideological commission. So the Commission has its own ideological agenda with the gender issues, with the rule of law issues, and the Commission wants to force, in many cases, a one-size-fits-all approach to all 27 member states. What I believe and what I'm convinced in, that it will not work. In the European Union, the heterogeneity of the member states, culturally, politically, historically, is so diverse that one-size-fits-all solutions that the European Commission is proposing cannot work. And my last point regarding the Commission is that my perception is that European citizens start to feel more and more that when a huge challenge is ahead of the European Union, it's not the European Commission which can solve it. The Greek Eurozone crisis was solved by Angela Merkel, so practically Germany, practically a member state solution. The migration solution is still unsolved, I think, so the migration is still an unsolved issue. The coronavirus crisis is still not solved by the European Commission. Member states are the main entities who are able to deliver solutions to the European citizen. I think this is also a conclusion from the last 10, 12 years. Let me carry on with the European Parliament. Many say that the European Parliament is or was the big winner of the Treaty of Lisbon, and to some extent I agree with that. For example, the European Parliament now has a say in the multi-annual financial framework, which is a very current and hot topic. True, more and more and many important legislative dossiers are now under the, so to say, co-decision, the ordinary legislative procedure. And of course, the European Parliament plays an important role in that. But let me also highlight some other issues. The first point, the election turnout, therefore the democratic legitimacy of the European Parliament has decreased in the last 10, 12 years. 2009, 2014, 2019, practically the number of European citizens who vote decreased or maybe stagnated in the last two elections. So we cannot say a better democratic or higher democratic legitimacy regarding the European Parliament. This is said, this is something that we need to tackle, that we need to deal with. My next point regarding the European Parliament is intra-European parliamentary issues. My first thing, EU 13 member states, I mean those member states which joined the European Union in and after 2004, are still not represented in the European Parliament legislation equally based on the number of populations they represent. For example, when we see the rapporteurship allocations in the most important files, EU 13 countries are still not there, still so to say all the member states are taking the lead. Another interesting point, what I want to say here, that Mediterranean countries, Spain, Greece, Portugal, somewhat Italy, are the winners of the Lisbon treaties. Maybe not the Lisbon Treaty, but with the enlargement of the European Union, in many cases, cohesion policy, whatever, Central Eastern European countries got their alliances with Mediterranean countries. Mediterranean countries became, in many cases, the bridges who connect Central Eastern European countries to all the member states, or Mediterranean countries became the ones with whom majority can be reached in the Council or in the Parliament, or maybe the blocking minority in the Council. My last point about the European Parliament is that sometimes I still feel a frustration, an institutional frustration from the European Parliament, that in the name of federalism, it wants to have more power and more influence, even more influence. That's very strikingly against member states and against the role of the Council. And sometimes I feel that this frustration turns out into like a political communication arena, which the European Parliament should be. I agree with that. But sometimes I feel that when the European Parliament cannot do really anything, then it just makes the voice and attacks some member states and the Council formation. And lastly, about the Council, some words, the European Council or the Council formations. One of the big achievements of the European Parliament was this, how do you say, Spitzenkandidaten system in the last, I don't know, 2 elections. But lastly, the Council, the presidents and the prime ministers of the European member states successfully turned down this effort. This was a clear example of the contradiction between European Council and European Parliament. More and more I see that the EC, the European Commission, is making an alliance with the European Parliament. This is the federalist side, against the Council, which is more like the side of the nation states, of the member states, of course. Nevertheless, the European Council, with some compromises, still has the final word in the multi-annual financial framework and in the RRF as well, so this recovery fund, which is still the European Council is able to protect some of the privileges and to have the final word in the political debates. And 2 more points about the Council is that I see that the rotating presidency, the system of the rotating presidency, becomes more and more symbolic. I see less and less power in the rotating presidency, and it's just more like a communication agenda that some member states are coming to the front line in these 6 months of rotating presidency. And maybe the last word about the European Council, that with Brexit, it's quantifiable that Germany, Spain, and France won with the Brexit. And for example, Poland lost with the Brexit because Poland lost a very crucial ally with the United Kingdom. So when we are talking about the future of Europe and maybe the future of the European Council, it should be noted that there are some powerful countries like Poland who lost a very powerful ally in the name of the United Kingdom. And my very last point, because I'm running out of time, is about the Conference on the Future of Europe, some ideas. My impressions and my take is that the starting point of this conference is already a federalist position. So it's already a little bit biased. More integration, more federalism, more power to Brussels institutions. I think there is a significant part of Europe who don't share this starting position. My second point is that green and digital agenda is at every corner of European discussion. My personal take again, that many European citizens, in light of the coronavirus crisis, they don't care about the digital and green agenda. They want to have healthcare and they want to have jobs back as soon as possible. And the digital and the green agenda seems a little bit far from this perspective of EU citizens. Third point, there is an ideological division in Europe, and clear division: federalism versus nation state. I don't think this Future of Europe conference can solve this issue. So in the very end, I'm very, very skeptical that those ambitious agenda, for example, transnational lists in the European Parliament, can be fulfilled. I feel that that this agenda is more for the Brussels elite and not really for the European citizens, and not addressing the needs of the European citizens in its current form. Nevertheless, I would encourage everyone to take part in this discussion and have their say, because this is the tool and this is the way now to create a better European Union, which is the interest of everyone. So let's see what the outcome is. Thank you very much for your attention. Sorry for being a little bit more, and I'm happy to discuss any views on this issue with you. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks a lot very much, Professor Kovac. It was very interesting analysis. And just wait, soon we will, put some additional questions to your speech as well. And, it seems to be, that there are many, things arising from as well your speech. And I think as well, many people, we get collected their opinion before we organize that debate. And as well, I was talking to a group of leaders at the Committee of Regions last week. And as well, I talked to the people and some representatives, very important person from many countries like Sweden, like Belgium, and many others. And the most, raised issue was, I think, that what you touch, how far the people in a particular country are from the Brussels. And this is a highest concern. And
I agree with that.
Yeah, what was highlighted, that the institution basically frequently focused, I am talking about the perception. The perception of the people is that the most talk is about the institutions in the Brussels. And what Schuman said, remember, I'm sure all of you, that, probably we don't remember, but we read it. He said that, it shouldn't be institutions or economy first. He was, highlighted the importance of a relationship. That's what he said. My idea is not to merge states to create a super state. Our European states are a historical reality. From a psychological point of view, it would be impossible to do away with them. Their diversity is a good thing, and we do not intend to level them down or equalize them. So we, of course, come to that point, and we are very interested as well, with that, opinion about that issues of the other speakers. And, Professor Kovac, I think Brexit is not only the loss for Poland. This is a loss for basically entire Europe. And
of course. Yeah, but I'm talking about the numbers, for example, regarding co-vote, sponsorship. It's a huge loss for Poland, but also for Europe.
Yeah, Professor, I understand you, and I'm not arguing. I'm just, saying that, from the perspective of, quality of the community, according to the Schuman.
Exactly.
This is a loss. Basically, this is a kind of a very small bankruptcy. Schuman was saying, as Excellency Ambassador from Spain said, that we need to follow this very slowly, because we are, dealing with a human being. If we will focus only on institutions or economy, mostly, then we can, face a bankruptcy of this great idea. So this is a little bit what is, coming to my, face after your speech. So now I would have a pleasure, for a speech to hear the speech of the Mr. Eduardas Borisovas, Excellency Ambassador of Lithuania to Poland, and be so kind to, speak about the post-Lisbon European Union future and strategic agenda. So, floor is yours, please.
Thank you very much, Professor. I hope that you hear me, and
yes.
I welcome everyone to this very interesting debate. And my understanding is that this debate is very timely as we enter a very interesting, challenging, and most probably lengthy process of defining the future of the European Union, and the Schuman debate of the future of Europe will be a good and valuable input into that debate and to providing good ideas for our discussions. From my point, actually, I would like simply to voice out several principles how Lithuania sees actually development of the European Union and the future of the European Union. As lately the European Union went through quite significant stresses, be it Brexit, which was very important, as it was already mentioned, not only for Poland, but I think for the whole of Europe, and it changed the European global stance a bit, we should admit that. And also a recent COVID crisis definitely made us quick learners and quick thinkers actually on some issues. Then we encountered situations when a few days waste of time could cost thousands or tens of thousands lives. So, but nevertheless, not being a pessimist about the European Union, but the optimist, I just want to stick to the Schumann's also words that never let a good crisis go to waste. We should learn from our mistakes. We should learn from the processes we are involved, and definitely have a good possibility to improve ourselves. So Lithuania definitely stands for the European Union to reinforce itself. So, and at stake we see the internal unity and effectiveness on the global scene. And that means that European stands in the changing global environment vis-a-vis United States, transatlantic relationship, be it Russia, the main challenger and an adversary in the European continent, and definitely China, a rising China as a superpower actually in the global environment. So definitely EU should take some steps to improve in certain areas, such as security, border protection, migration challenges, and definitely internal market. And also what we strive for, that European Union should be based on economic and social cohesion, solidarity, sustainable growth, and not last, efficient foreign policy, which should be basis of the European Union place in the global changing environment. We are remaining rather skeptical towards the major institutional changes in the European Union, in the short run especially, and EU should continue to work within the existing treaties. So focusing on initiatives where we can reach a consensus and move forward. Enhanced cooperation instruments could serve as an option to move forward for those who are ready to advance in certain areas, but going within the European Union treaties. And this process should be open for anyone willing to join. And Lithuania is determined to remain in the forefront of the European Union integration. Also, what is important that has been noticed lately, that we need to strengthen internal resilience of the European Union and countering hybrid threats, ensuring security and strategic communication is becoming an paramount and key importance issues. Europe, as such, has to invest more into strengthening the transatlantic link and has to remain open to the Eastern partners and to help them to fulfill their contractual commitments, in particular with association agreements, and definitely demanding to deliver reforms. And what I has already mentioned, that completion of the single market stays among the main goals of the European Union. And we should focus on the remaining barriers, hindering full potential of single market. EU's role in influence in the as a global power is closely tied to the strength of multilateral system and the EU's global partnerships. So EU's modus operandi in foreign policy has always been to support international institutions and rules. So the EU's commitment to defend and promote the rules-based international order and democratic model will continue to be tested. So the EU needs to be active, ensuring respect to the international law. And that's evident that blatant in Russia and Belarus, where governments continue to oppress democratic societies, we need to keep our common position and our principles actually strong and solid. It remains crucial to speak united with one voice across the international forums, and EU members need to have the EU foreign policy in mind when developing bilateral relations. So the EU's global goals are made stronger by strategic partnerships, and in particular with the United States, as I have mentioned before. So transatlantic bond should be based on shared values and interests, which are key to the European security. And European defense initiatives must be developed with the openness and transparency, delivering on commitments to the alliances, burden sharing, and defense investment. I need to stress the importance of coordinated and systematic response of the EU and the United States towards Russian and Chinese challenge. And these challenges cannot be overstated. As Russia remains a key threat to the whole transatlantic security, it is our strong position coordinated amongst the EU, NATO, and the United States should definitely be as a main point for us to follow. So also we should say actually that EU should stand firm behind human rights protection in the world, as it was before, and in the region and in the neighborhood in particular. So in this, I take in mind Russian and Belarus administrations and oppression of civil societies. They actually take now, and this is definitely is for the European Union to be firm and solid, influencing their internal decisions and maintaining and supporting human rights in these countries. So the support for Eastern partnerships for countries like Ukraine, Georgia, and Moldova definitely need to be pursued with a clear Euro-Atlantic perspective for these countries. In the area of foreign and security and defense policy, United Kingdom remains the main EU partner and NATO ally. And this is in the EU interest that this partnership and cooperation with the United Kingdom on foreign policy, security, and defense is stronger and more ambitious than with other third countries. Speaking about strategic compass, we should reflect on the threats and challenges that the EU faces based on the threat analysis. And the main implication of security threats and challenges should not be that the EU has to act autonomously. We need to develop capabilities which should be also available to NATO. Complementarity with NATO should be among the general principles of our security agenda. We remain strong advocates of unanimity and consensus-based process of the EU decision-making in common foreign and security policy. And on qualified majority voting, our political solidarity and strong backing of the decision create trust, credibility, and enhance our global role. So decisions backed by consensus weight more than those pushed through qualitative majority vote. If difference in national interests are substantial, decisions under qualitative majority vote would be divisive, controversial, and ineffective. Definitely, it's possible to use core groups when we form our foreign policy. But at this time, and in particular, we need to strengthen a role of the High Representative, Vice President of the Commission, in the context of the cooperation with the third countries. Strong coordination and close cooperation with member states remains essential in this sense, and balance between speed, efficiency, effectiveness, and legitimacy has to be observed. Speaking about institutional arrangements in the EU and in the future debate, we are of the view that the Commission needs to act as a guardian of the EU treaties. At the same time, it should seek for a common denominator and balance among all member states in proposing legislative initiatives. Also, we are a bit skeptical about the joint constituency and transnational lists in the European Parliament. That some members of Parliament, of European Parliament, could represent all the EU citizens with different views and interests. That we are a bit skeptical about that. And what we could lose in the process, that closeness to the voters, to the electorate, and definitely we need also to respect the principles of digressive proportionality and equal opportunities of all candidates for the European Parliament, including those from the smaller member states. Also, speaking about institutions, we do not see any merit in merging functions of the President of the Commission and the President of the European Parliament. Mixing executive and legislative powers could be dangerous. And different competences and roles of the two makes unclear whether the President of the Commission cannot take instructions from the government and could be the voice of the member states. So these are my remarks, and I will be ready to develop in case there are further questions. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed, Excellency. So I would like, just to put one question to last three speakers, very short question, okay, to Excellency Ambassador of Spain and Professor Kovac and Mr. Eduardas Borisovas. There are many issues around European Union, and we are on in some place which is not exactly similar to that what was after the Second War, but there were many, problems, and Schuman with his team, they had to select some, pick up some priorities. So my question would be, around this many, issues you mentioned, last three speakers, I noticed that some, of course, which is a clear, your speech is basically including some certain point of view of your country, which is a normal. And this means that any uniform is not applicable. because in the community of European nations, according to Schuman, we cannot ignore the specificity and certain context of each country, small or big country. So my question is to you, what do you think around this all many issues? What Schuman would pick up as the highest priority? So it would be interesting, question to all of you. So first of all, Excellency Francisco Javier Sanabria, be so kind to give a short answer, excuse me.
Well, thank you very much. A short answer. Schuman, I really don't know, but I can make a guess. I would say that our, let's say, challenge today is it's multifold. Well, first, to consolidate what we have, because as a matter of fact, after Brexit, there is, theoretically speaking, a risk that the EU may continue a way of contraction, and that would be detrimental to the whole union. So that has to be stopped. From our point of view of Spain is that with the agreements that we have achieved in December, well, the leaders, the member states, they have done their job. But now these agreements have to be ratified and implemented. So, as usual, I mean, this is a never-ending story, and it's life. So everything goes on, and there is a stop. So we have first to consolidate. Second, in the short term, to try to recover as soon as possible from the effect of COVID, which have been really well, very, very hard in the sanitary, of course, which is the most important thing, human aspect, but also in the economic aspect. And this is a joint endeavor. Here we have to work together. In the longer term, well, we have well, the word federalist has been mentioned, of course, in this debate. It's obvious it has to, it should be. Well, an aspiration to make a better Europe is something that I would say necessary. But of course, the views of a better Europe, well, they differ. But from my point of view, Europe today is, of course, much better than it was 20 or even, of course, 60 years ago. I said that, well, my impression is that Schuman, in his beatitude, he would be very happy and satisfied with the achievements that have been really obtained in this 60 years. So in the longer term, I would say that we need a little bit more of a political integration, without clashing the national spirit, which Schuman said it belongs to it. I mean, we have to be respectful to the roots, and not only to the European roots, common roots, but also to the national roots. It's not so easy to make that, but there is a factor that I'm pretty sure that will help Europe to make progress. It has been always a factor that has helped Europe to make progress, namely what we see outside Europe. There's China. There is, I mean, the transatlantic link, very important, as my friend Eduardo rightly pointed out. Well, there's Africa. There is the Middle East. There is our neighborhoods. Well, this challenging time and this movement that goes very, very fast will, of course, push us for sure to make also progress within us. We should highlight and what unites us and make a good use of that, instead of really pointing at things that make us different. So if we work in that direction, we will have a better Europe in this decade and in the next decade. Thank you.
Thank you, Excellency. Professor Kovac, what Schuman, according to you, would pick up as the highest priority and why?
Maybe my first point is respect to member states and respect to, I would say, small member states. Sorry to use this word, so small member states. Just like when the European Union or European Community was founded, Belgium and Luxembourg could be on equal footing with France and Germany, no matter the different political, economic, whatever influence status. Of course, it's not the same, sorry to say. And the whole integration process could start. This point, I mean, this respect to member states and small member states should be mainstream or one of the fundamental principles of answering the challenges that we are facing now. This is my first point. The second point, I strongly agree with High Excellency that social issues to deal with the economy of the European Union. Just like after the Second World War, there were challenges in social and economy, tremendous in Western Europe, I mean, all across Europe. Just like we are facing now economic and social challenges at this moment. Unemployment, youth unemployment, to give a vision not only to the European Union but to the ordinary citizens is inevitable, and the responsibility of all of us, of course, but also the political leadership of the European institutions and the member states. So social and economic progress in a way. And maybe my last point is that European institutions should be not for creating and recreating the Brussels bubble, but for the citizens. Sometimes, of course, the big administration has the inclination to justify the existence of the bureaucracy and of the institutions. They are more distant now from the European citizens than what I personally find healthy or good. So that is maybe the third challenge that we should deal with. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Professor. Now, Mr. Eduardas Borisovas, what, according to you, Schuman would pick up as the highest priority between many other issues, many different issues?
Thank you very much for the question. Probably I will start with the Schumann's words, and I quote, Europe will not be made all at once or according to a single plan. It will be built through concrete achievements. So we could probably all subscribe to that, but definitely speaking from the Robert Schuman perspective, I could imagine that he couldn't even envisage and see the EU as it is now in his dearest dreams, actually. I think how far this EU went from the initial idea of the Union of the coal and steel, which was formed in 1956. Definitely he could not imagine EU with the UK because he didn't see the UK in the European Union. So for him, probably that was not a problem at the time. Nevertheless, actually, he acted in the Cold War environment. But what we see now that after the Cold War, the European Union emerged as a global power. For now, it's a rather soft global power, but nevertheless, it's a global power. And that evolved from the original economic union. As I've said, probably we need to focus on improving single market and removing the remaining barriers, actually, to make European Union strong and solid and effective. Also, I mentioned several times the basic principles of common security and foreign policy. If the EU wants to be a global player, so we need to keep basic principles. basic principles and to follow democratic values, which is a cornerstone of the EU development. So here we definitely need to maintain this in mind when we are dealing with the third countries, or especially with our neighborhood, be it in the east or be it in the south. And also EU should be strong, united vis-à-vis the main challengers in the international arena and main partners in the international arena, and to build solid alliances across the globe. And definitely pursue its initial and basic principles. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. So Schuman, after Second War, his main concept was basically summarized in some certain sentence: the unity, solidarity, and peace. And after the Second War, he just, worked very long time with Adenauer and de Gasperi on the unity. Before the Cohen still, community was created. So the Still and Cohen and Still community was a kind of a expression of the solidarity. Solidarity is a very material issue, very concrete issue. But before that, he worked on the unity. So unity is an assumption, is a fundament. So after some time, about the unity, especially between Germany and France, but others countries as well. After some times, Adenauer called him during this, a meeting of the government. Schuman was at that time the foreign minister, and said Adenauer to him, Mr. Schuman, let's start. And Schuman came back, to the meeting, announcing to the government, him as a Minister of Foreign Affairs, that we start with Germany uniting our efforts, our forces. And could you imagine if some foreign minister in Poland or in Spain or in Latvia is going to the meeting and saying to the Prime Minister, we are going with Mr. Adenauer, to do that and that. He would be on the right, at that time he will be, released from the seat, right? And this was basically a kind of God's, hand. And nobody raised any voice at that meeting. So it meant just a silence. The silence, expressed that we agree. Although in the French government were only 3 ministers in the favor of Schuman at that time. So the servant of God, Robert Schuman, is not just an accident. Why I am talking about that? Because the question nowadays is, do we have unity? And you excellencies and professor, you express that there is some doubts with the unity. If there is not unity, there will be a problem with the solidarity. So I am not going to develop the discussion. The Nord Stream 2, is that sign of the solidarity or opposite? Then, if there is not solidarity, we cannot achieve a peace. The opposite to peace is a war. So just this, reflection, this just consideration can give us some certain impression about what is the real issue. And thank you very much indeed for your basically considerations, because I was not planning to put that statement in my speech, but you, challenged me to express that. So having this now, we have a very big pleasure, Professor Frederick Callemant. You speak about that Lisbon Treaty and the debt crisis. What adjustments have been made in the treaties to date to contain the public debt crisis? Which limitations have been encountered? What the new developments should be considered? But of course, you can, make flexible your speech if you would like, to refer to some certain, speakers. Go ahead, floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Professor Krzyziak, and thank you very much for your invitation to take part in this debate. I hope that everybody can hear me. Yes.
Yes.
Great. And I would like also to congratulate you for this very exciting and timely series of debates on European integration. I'm all the more sensitive to your invitation and the general topic of these debates, I mean the modernity of Robert Schumann's thought, because I live 2 kilometers from the house where he lived. I work next to the house where he was born in Luxembourg, in Clausen, more specifically. And every time I walk in Metz city center, I pass by Robert Schumann's law office or the prison where he was jailed by the Gestapo in 1940. So, and finally, I coordinate also the Robert Schuman initiative, the Jean Monnet Center of Excellence at the University of Luxembourg. So you can see that I'm very well inspired by Robert Schumann's thinking. And I hope that I could transmit this inspiration to you also. In this respect, when discussing the future of Europe, we must bear in mind Robert Schumann's recommendation. Nothing lasting is accomplished in an easy way. In French, rien de durable ne s'accomplit dans la facilité. This advice was partially followed by the heads of state or government during the negotiations on economic and monetary union in Maastricht, and then during the subsequent revisions of the treaties. 30 years after the Maastricht Treaty, 15 years after Lisbon Treaty, EMU remains strictly an incomplete policy. Despite the establishment of monetary union and the introduction of the single currency in 1909, the union's competencies for economic policy coordination have not changed since the Maastricht Treaty. In fact, these competencies remain very close to what they were under the treaties of Rome. This makes the EMU, the Economic and Monetary Union, based on an asymmetry, which makes the functioning of the EMU very difficult, very complex. In addition, beyond the asymmetry issues, the coordination of economic policies proved to be based on a too optimistic perspective. It gives central importance to the market and limits the action of the union's institutions to the formulation of prohibitions. But we can't build a common future only on prohibitions. We have, if we want to build a common future, common perspective, we need also to have positive obligation to go together in the same direction. And the COVID crisis highlights the weakness of the economic pillar and especially of the European budgetary framework. The approach promoted by the European treaties is based on controlling the side of public deficit and not on the quality of public spending. As a result, since Maastricht, the budgetary adjustments implemented in the majority of member states, there are some exceptions, have resulted in a reduction in public investment rather than in the control of operating expenditure. This approach has the obvious merit maybe of preserving economic growth in the short term. However, in the long term, this fiscal consolidation policy focused on public investment tends to weaken the growth potential of the member states and of the EU, obviously. This is particularly true for the most fiscally fragile member states. The never-ending implementation of austerity policies locks them into a spiral of weak growth. The result is a widening of the medium and long-term competitiveness gap between national economies within the euro area. This makes the condition for restoring a sound budgetary situation even more complicated for member states which are already in a weak situation. In fact, fiscally and economically fragile member states are faced with a false alternative. They can decide to engage in structural reforms that are financially and politically very costly in the short term and only yield benefits in the medium and long term. Few governments have been re-elected on the basis of an adjustment program for operating expenses. cuts in public services or reforms of social benefit systems. This is the Juncker paradox that you certainly all know. The other alternative is to wait for external support, fiscal stimulus from a partner economy, for example, the German economy, collective financial support, or financial assistance in case of major financial difficulties. However, this alternative does not avoid the commitment to reform. On the contrary, reforming is key to get any financial support, whatever the form will be. No support without reform. This is exactly what the European Recovery and Resilience Facility, the main part of the Next Generation EU, which is being under discussion now, is all about. It takes up the concept that was put forward to establish the Eurozone budget. It is a support mechanism for national structural reforms. As we have seen in the Greek case, this conditionality blurs the distribution of responsibilities between European and national authorities. How much freedom and national autonomy is still there in the preparation of reforms plan and budgetary adjustment programs when their adoption is conditional on financial support? Formally, the member states retain their competence to define the nature of reform they wish to carry out. In practice, the situation is very more complex, and both the Commission and the Eurogroup guide the decisions of the member states. We don't know exactly who is writing adjustment program. Commission, Eurogroup, Council, or member states, not so clear. And the situation from a legal perspective raises also the question of the justiciability of economic policy measures. Who is responsible at the very end for the reduction in civil servant salaries and the failure or the reduction of public services? This is the difficulty faced by Greek, Romanian, and Portuguese citizens who wanted to challenge the austerity measures implemented from 2011 in court. The complexity of European economic governance, the contribution of informal bodies like the Eurogroup or international organizations like the European Stability Mechanism have led to a series of declarations of inadmissibility of appeals. No one at the end was responsible. So one might judicial oversight will be compensated for by increased parliamentary scrutiny. This is not the case. In the economic pillar of the Economic and Monetary Union, the European Parliament is kept largely out of the decision-making process. This has been already developed by the previous speaker, so I won't detail too much this point. Maybe we could think about the national parliament. What could be their own responsibility? We must admit that it can only control the action of the respective national governments. And as I said, the governance of the EMU is more complex. It involves not only national authorities, but also European authorities. So it means that national parliaments will be able only to control a very small part of economic governance. A third point that I would like to address here, this is a very thin separation, the very thin line between what is monetary policy and what is fiscal policy. Both are the two sides of the same coin, macroeconomic policy. The COVID crisis accentuated both the risks of deflation and the tension on certain debt markets, for example, the situation of Italy, and obliged the ECB to relaunch its asset purchase programs. It now holds almost 30% of the public debt of the member states of the euro area. It's a lot. The Court of Justice has rightly validated, from my point of view, the ECB measures. However, the negotiators of the Maastricht Treaty, we need to be clear on this point, never envisaged that the ECB could buy trillions of public debt, even though they gave it the tools and powers to do so. However, it was not the intention of the Maastricht Treaty negotiator to allow the ECB to buy so many public debt. The consequence of this situation is repeated litigations between European and national judges. And you know all the litigation, the situation in Germany with the Supreme Court, who decided that the last case of the European Court of Justice was ultra vires. And the problem is that we're now entering into the contestation of the primacy. And to give you just a few examples, the French government based a regular position in a litigation against the data collection on the German constitutional opinion. So it means that the principle of primacy law, of EU primacy law, is putting on under pressure. What I'm expecting on this basis is that a few reforms could be implemented in the EMU area. Just, I will give you 5 points. First, the Union's competence in the field of economic policy must be strengthened. The ambiguity of the treaties, according to which member states shall coordinate their economic policies within the Council, must be abandoned, clearly. The treaty must lay clearly that the Union coordinates the economic policies of the member states. It seems to be a very small changes. However, it says a lot about the necessity to have a common view about economic policy and a common view established at the European level. Second reform that could be pushed forward. The Union's budgetary capacity must be also strengthened in a sustainable way to accompany structural reforms in all the member states, in the euro area, and also outside the euro area. The adoption of the Next Generation EU program is a step in the right direction, but it's based on a fragile assumption, the possibility that the member states will agree to provide the Union with new own resources to repay its borrowings on the financial markets. And as you all know, the creation of any new own resources presupposes a double unanimous vote by the Council at the level of the creation of the tax itself, and then at the level of the allocation of the revenue from the new tax to the Union budget. So the dangers of these voting rules are very clear. Qualified majority must replace unanimity in these two policy fields. Third point, the governance of EMU must be simplified and democratized. With the departure of the UK,
Sorry, your microphone switch on, please.
Yeah, thank you. I don't know why it's switched off. It's very weird. Well, so maybe the third point, governance of EMU must be simplified and democratized. With the departure of the UK, the Eurogroup is no longer necessary. It should be abolished. Second, the ESM must also be incorporated into EU law in the form of European Monetary Fund, and to ensure that the Union's coordinating powers are exercised effectively, a post of a high representative for economic and financial affairs, or a kind of European finance minister, must be created. He or she will head the ECOFIN Council and the European Commission's ECFIN Directorate General. He could also represent the Union at international financial institutions in economic matters, because in monetary matters, this is the ECB who is able to represent the euro area. I will just finish with this point. Last, this is about democratization of EMU. This requires a generalization of the ordinary legislative procedure and the establishment of a regular economic dialogue between the European Finance Minister and the European Parliament. I'm also suggesting that a kind of Euro fiscal stance could be debated and by the European Parliament every year, and that the multi-financial framework, for example, and the next European strategy could be also debated, not only by European Parliament, but by representatives of the European Parliament and of the national parliament. Well, I've got some other reforms that I could share with you. I let this for discussion. Thank you very much for your attention, and I hope this will be helpful for our future discussion. Thanks.
Thanks a lot. Stay with us, and we will come back to some points of view. So now I know Excellency Ambassador Eduardas Borisovas. He has a very important meeting after 6 o'clock. So if you would like, Excellency, to add or to refer to some previous speeches of the speakers, so I give you a floor for a second. And you can probably, attach as well a point, Freezes project, Community of Freezes Nations. Do you think it's a very important added value to basically reshape and support the reshaping of European Union? What do you think? Just a short, dedicate that for that topic, the consideration. So we need to switch your microphone, Excellency, please.
Yeah, so thank you very much. I'm still actually with you and will be for some time actually following this discussion, which is very interesting, and it's interesting for me also to hear different views. Just to tell a few remarks actually about European Union future as such. As it was mentioned, the solidarity is the essence. Solidarity and unified positions. And also it was mentioned that if we are in solidarity actually lately, and some particular examples we mentioned like Nord Stream 2, I should say in general, actually, we are really in good actually shape, taking into account the solidarity we have among EU member states and what we have actually recently. And all the situation after 2014, annexation of Crimea, occupation of certain Donbass areas, and sanctions put on Russia. Those definitely been tested on several occasions, but we still remain actually in solidarity on these basic principles, and which also shows that on this, particular some points, we would stay together, unified, and to show EU as a whole and without any breaches. If to speak about particular issues like Nord Stream 2, definitely there are different positions of member states. Lithuania, since the very beginning, since the Nord Stream 1, not Nord Stream 2, since Nord Stream 1 was opposing Nord Stream project as such, because that we saw as a geopolitical project, not economic project, and it seems that we are right then, and we are right still, that actually with gas pipelines bypassing our eastern neighborhood, in particular Ukraine, we could face huge challenges from the side of our eastern neighbor Russia. So we have our position on Nord Stream 2, but we also understand if other countries have their own positions on these issues. So here I don't see that this should be taken as some sort of a crumbling EU apart or something like that. But definitely we need to be as unified as possible. So why we are against qualified majority voting? Because at least at this moment, we need to have unified, unanimous positions on particularly important issues, especially when the global environment is changing. You also mentioned initially and suggested initially to speak a bit about 3C's initiative and how it fits within the European Union. And definitely we see as some sort of added value and additional strength to the European Union. Why? Because we see this regional approach and regional solidarity as additional possibility to attract attention to the EU as a whole, and to improve particular regions which are still underdeveloped actually within the EU. And Eastern European member states definitely need such a boost, and particularly these three main areas where we are focusing, developing 3Cs initiative, and namely this is transport infrastructure development, energy infrastructure and safety development, and also digitalization actually of the region, I think could fit well in the whole actually prospect of the EU development. So we are strongly in favor and stand behind 3Cs initiative development as a member state of the EU. And also additional added value of the 3Cs initiative is attraction of partners like United States to the European Union and to the issues which are relevant and very important for the European Union as a whole. Thank you very much for inviting me, and I still be with you for some time, but thank you for an opportunity to take the floor again, and I wish you all very good and interesting debate and to make good conclusions, and I'm really glad that this process started in such an interesting and effective way. Thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot, Excellency. Thank you for your contribution, and stay with us as long as you can. And now be so kind to Your Excellency, Dr. Ewa Salkiewicz-Munerlin, about how could community of European nations, how could the nations according to Robert Schuman look like? So just be some kind of 15 minutes, not longer. I need to keep, the time. So, and if you will not finish all your prepared for today considerations, then there will be a time at the very end and you can, extend it. So go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers for the invitation. Our meetings are intended to be a brainstorming session from which proposals can be made for the smooth functioning of the EU. The main topic is the renewing the European Union, the Lisbon Treaty, after 12 years of functioning. The Spanish ambassador to Poland, His Excellency Francisco Xavier Sanabria, presented the topic how Schuman would like to shape the EU today. The ambassador of Lithuania to Poland, His Excellency Eduardas Borisovas, presented the post-Lisbon EU future and strategic agenda. My topic is how could community of European nations, according to Robert Schuman, look like? These topics, in my view, are interconnected. First, it is very difficult to say how the founding fathers would like to see the EU develop because they are no longer alive. Therefore, we can only rely on what they wrote and said during their lifetime. Having read the writings of Robert Schuman, I have to say that unfortunately what is happening now in the EU does not correspond to Robert Schuman's vision. In the course of my speech, I will be quoting these passages from Schumann works and speeches and confronting them with the current situation in the Union. Secondly, we can have endless discussions, but the point is that the proposals have to be put into practice and not to be just wishful thinking. For this to happen, there has to be a consensus among the EU countries, and so far we see that they are interest groups that are based on economic interest and not on the interest of human beings, which was the basis of all for Robert Schumann's considerations. Of course, the economy is important for countries to reach a high level of development, but it has to be a cooperation and not a race of who gives more. Thirdly, smaller countries are more interested in EU membership than larger ones because they count on common economic aid and faster development. So As usual, something for something. Nothing is for free. Bigger countries, due to the fact that they have more votes, for example, the representatives at the European parliaments, can more easily control the adoption of new legal solutions. Fourthly, in order for each country to feel appreciated, a common body should be set up in which each country, regardless of size, would have one vote. Then, to reduce the number of commissioners and MIPs, and to use these funds to set up a single solidarity fund, not from contributions by member states. 5. Abolish at least 25 official languages and leave only English and French. This would also help to reduce the EU budget, which is made up of contributions from the member states. Of course, some of you smile, and you can smile, but unfortunately, if we base on the human beings, the people are not very happy with overpaid MIP and other things happening in the EU. It's easy to be happy living in Luxembourg and seeing it, but has nothing to do what Robert Schuman wanted to be. Countries joining an international organization, especially one with supranational character, should know that there is a limitation of their sovereignty. This I agree absolutely, because I'm an international law teacher and I know what are the bases of this law. According to the Vienna Convention of the Law on Treaties from '69, objections, of course, can be raised to any agreement unless, according to Article 19, the reservation is incompatible with the object and purpose of the treaty. And moreover, of course, maybe you read the convention, so you know that when a treaty is a constituent instrument of an international organization, and unless it otherwise provides, a reservation requires the acceptance of the competent organ of that organization. So it is like a supervision for something. Of course, I will not discuss here because I put in writings about the Vienna Convention on Treaties. So this is for the procedure opt-out and other things about reservation, of course, in writings and so on. So now about what Schuman said, not what I think he said. The main elements of Schumann's concept of the European community can be summarized as follows. The person is at the center of human progress. The community must therefore look both at the material and at the spiritual dimension of the person. In sum, unity in diversity reflects the unity of the parts in a whole. The same way that persons are unique and still dependent of a human community, states can be unique and still part of a bigger whole, a bigger community, as advocated by personalist philosophers and the papal magisterium. Third, the culture is the basis for political integration. As everybody of us know, Europe is an état d'esprit, a mindset that will acquire over time through personal contacts and cannot be imposed by the institutions. Therefore, the need not only to soften or erase borders in order to transform them into point of contacts, but also to actively organize these personal exchanges. The community as a political project must be democratic and not non-confessional, pluralistic and based on the absolute dignity of every person. Because it is supranational, it transcends the nation state without erasing it by reinventing the concept of sovereignty. The community is open to the world for the common good in solidarity with the one human family, following St. Thomas' teaching, but also the pontifical magisterium. The participation of persons and groups should be encouraged beyond the institutions and the state in order to make the community alive. So the concept of community still recalls a certain quality of relations between the members of the EU, both the nation states and the persons living in them. The ideal type of relation of the community and the appreciation of regional and local particularities in Schumann's vision, the community is not limited to a small group or a geographic agenda. Schuman and founding fathers put also culture and a certain mindset at the core of the community rather than any geographical or political definition. Therefore, a deeper analysis of the concept and policy relevance of culture, cultural diversity, and diversity management policies would be important for future research. Diversity in Europe today is very different from the diversity at the time of the founding fathers, but some important principles remained valid, mainly the respect of personal freedom, human dignity, pluralism, and also the need to increase personal contacts to strengthen social bonds. As stated by Schuman, only a dialogue that transforms mindsets and allows for mutual understanding will contribute to build a true European community. Therefore, an analysis of European project for intercultural dialogue would prove useful to measure the extent to which this kind of transforming exchanges is taking place in Europe today. The approach of Schuman and the founding fathers overcomes several academic controversies and oppositions. On one hand, they go beyond the traditional opposition between community and society in sociology by proposing the goal of bringing community-quality relations to the broader society and even to relations between states. The approach also overcomes the opposition between federalist and intergovernmentalist or realist in the field of European integration studies. A new concept is being proposed as equality distant from the traditional interstate relations and from the idea of a superstate, the supranational. The tools to overcome this opposition are the principles of social teaching. It is the subsidiarity and participation. And as we know, the European community is an open-ending and unique process whose main goal is the transformation of the participants to merge their interests towards the common good without losing their specific identity, but enriching it and an added value. That is why the theories of European integration could also shed light on how to build on Schuman's concept of community, the multi-level governance approach, for example, to integration, or its cosmopolitical perspective seem to be the best suited to analysis the political European community as presented by Robert Schuman. The declaration of Schuman showed that France has taken the initiative to build a new Europe on the basis of equity with Germany. This was un saut dans l'inconnu, a leap in the dark. We shall have to replace all the tendencies inherited from the past with the notion of solidarity, that is to say, the conviction that the real interest of all lies in acknowledging and accepting the interdependency of all. Egoism does not pay anymore. As we know, the three essential elements for successful European unification is effective solidarity, moral order, and European heritage. At the same time, Schuman insists that Christianity is not and must not be integrated into a political system, and therefore also not to be identified with any form of government, however democratic it might be. He stresses the importance of separation of church and state affairs in this regard, saying, and this is, I quote what he said, Schuman, not me, "We must distinguish what belongs to Caesar and what belongs to God. each of these powers has its own responsibilities. The Church has to make sure that natural laws and truths are respected. However, it should not become the judge of concrete choices which have to be made from the practical point of view in line with the opportunities of the moment and that arise due to psychological and historical developments. The responsible politicians' tasks consist in reconciliating these two ideas, the spiritual and the secular. Our lives often become confused because of the problems we face and the choices we have to make, especially in the passion of controversy. However, no conflict involving these two requirements is insolvable, since one is an immutable doctrine of principles and the other implies wise administration of changing situations that have to be considered in the lives of population and the individuals. This is what Schumann said in his book for Europe, pages 46, 47. So now we can eventually propose some items. What should we do? The declaration, what I said before, showed that France has taken the initiative to build a new Europe on the basis of equality with Germany. So maybe it is too controversial or too revolutionary, but we can discuss, of course, because this is a brainstorming, not that we are adopting any laws here. We can do the same by creating, for example, ad hoc working groups between the EU members and the non-EU neighbors, like, for example, between Poland and Russia, between Hungary and Serbia, etc. Moreover, we should speed up negotiations with Turkey and start with Russia if possible, as it is better to have an enemy at home than against with the NATO. It's the same thing. We should, but of course for political reasons. We should also limit the number of members of European parliaments, in my view, because it is too much expensive. And of course, if they want to work gratis, they can do, but of course not. I will not explain to you now how much the salary is in, etc. But of course, it is not very popular for human beings, and it is not paid, of course, by EU, but each member state countries who are represented in the EU. An unreformed EU will lose its members just as it lost the UK, because only small countries, as I said before, will have an interest in being in the EU, while larger ones will enter into other alliances, such as Visegrad Group, the Treaty Initiative, and so on. Of course, it's very good and it can be within the EU, but on the basis of equality. And now the unifying element in the Union is money, not the principles on which it was founded. For example, solidarity, Christian roots, and the common goods. Where is the common goods in the Union? Nord Stream 2? We can form parliamentary groups, of course, within the European Parliament to try to get some sort of party majority, but this will not translate into EU decisions because these are mostly political decisions, not parliamentary ones. Thank you for your attention.
Thanks, Excellency. Very great speech, and thank you very much. You put on the table many proposals. I really appreciate many proposals, and basically all of them. I can conclude what Schumann said. I came to serve, not to be served.
Exactly.
And this is basically something which we probably need very much indeed. And now, the community, European community cannot be uniformed. Cannot be uniformed. And now we are going to have a great speech of Excellency Ambassador of the Kingdom of Denmark to Poland, Mr. Ole Toft, because the Denmark proved that the Kingdom of Denmark signed the Treaty of Lisbon only after opting out from European Union policies in relations to security, defense, citizenship, police and justice, and the adoption of the euro. The question, Excellency, to you, how can we value the experience of Denmark in 12 years of functioning of the Lisbon Treaty, and how are you happy I think you are happy because, you know, this proves the community is not just uniform. If we became a uniform, we go bankrupt. This excellent, you know, idea of Schumann, Adenauer, De Gasperi, and the others will go bankrupt. And I really admire the Denmark for making that step. And I think the Denmark anticipated many years ago the issues or problems which can be faced. And this was a very smart step. So, Excellency, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And thank you for the invitation to participate here today. It has been very, very interesting to follow the discussion. And I'm looking forward to continue doing so until the very end. With regard to Denmark and its position in the EU, then in the early 90s, after the fall of communism, then at that time, the reunification of Germany and the perspective of enlargement with the new democracies in Central Europe meant that the European Union and the community at that time had to revisit and update its treaty foundation. The result was the Maastricht Treaty, which implied a considerable further integration and deepening of the cooperation. The EEC became the European Union with the Maastricht Treaty. And Denmark participated in the intergovernmental conference leading up to the Maastricht Treaty. And the Danish government and a clear majority in our parliament supported the new treaty. However, according to Article 20 in the Danish constitution, any transfer of sovereignty to an intergovernmental organization demands either a majority in our parliament of 5/6 of its members or adoption by a simple majority in parliament followed by approval at a referendum. And in this case, after the Maastricht Treaty, we needed a referendum to approve the treaty. And at the referendum, the Maastricht Treaty was rejected by a majority of voters. And as a consequence, Denmark either had to leave the Union or some kind of understanding had to be found between Denmark and the other member states on the relations between Denmark and the Union. This was, of course, an extremely difficult situation for a small country like Denmark. But I must say that we were met with considerable, you could say, understanding and flexibility by our European partners, and also a great willingness in the EU institutions and in the legal services of both the Commission and the Council to find a way forward when this situation was created. What happened then next was that in the Danish Parliament, the parties, both those supporting the Union Treaty and those skeptical about the new treaty, they found together and sat down and negotiated a so-called national compromise on the new treaty. And on this background, we then approached and negotiated an agreement with the other member states, the so-called Edinburgh Agreement. And this agreement implied that Denmark got opt-outs in 4 areas: the euro, defense, justice and home affairs, and the concept of union citizenship as more than a mere supplement to national citizenship. And then the Maastricht Treaty and the Edinburgh Agreement was put forward again at a referendum in Denmark, and this time adopted by a majority of the Danish voters on the 18th of May 1993. And since then, the opt-outs have existed as part of Denmark's relations with the EU, a fundamental part of our relations with the EU. And these opt-outs have been reaffirmed in all new treaties, including the existing Treaty of Lisbon. Have you tried to repeal the opt-out? Yes, twice. In 2000, we had a referendum of repealing the opt-out on the euro, and in 2015, a referendum on repealing the opt-out on justice and home affairs. And both times, the voters decided to maintain the opt-outs. Will we have more opt-outs on repealing, more referenda on repealing the opt-outs? Yes, I guess very likely. A large group of parties in our parliament wish to do so, but I do not foresee any new referendum in the near future.
So I can be here for a moment.
Have we paid a price for standing outside parts of the cooperation? Yes, definitely. First of all, we do not participate in decisions on some very important policy areas. Secondly, we are not member of the Eurogroup, which are a key decision-making forum in the EU today. Thirdly, at all intergovernmental conferences since Maastricht, our main priority has been to maintain the opt-out, which reduced influence for us and on other points discussed at the intergovernmental conferences. And you could say very concrete, we have had to maintain a higher interest rate than the ECB, at least as long as positive interest rates existed. And I guess we will have to do so again when normality returns to the economy, as I'm certain it will at some time. And I believe the cost of these opt-outs are rising for today as EU cooperation intensifies in areas such as exactly the euro, defense, and justice and home affairs. But have we been able to live with our opt-outs? That's also what you ask us. And yes, I think so. During the last 20 years, Denmark has done very well. But part of the explanation, I think, is to be found in the paradox, if you can say so, that Denmark, at the same time as having the opt-outs, is a kind of best behaving pupil in the class amongst member states. Let me give you a few examples. The Danish currency, the kroner, is pegged to the euro, and we have a very strong and solid economy, probably more solid than if we did not had to be following the euro so closely. We also implement and enforce EU legislation with great loyalty, and we are normally at the very top of EU Commission scoreboards like the Internal Market Scoreboard and the Digital Economy and Social Society Index. We have relatively few court cases at the European Court of Justice in Luxembourg, and we do our utmost to follow court decisions. And then things are, according to Eurostat, among those who are most positive towards the EU. So it's absolutely not because we want to leave the EU. We do not see any realistic alternative to EU membership in a globalized world. And now we are facing a new conference on the future of Europe, not an intergovernmental conference, not a convention, but a more informal discussion on the future of Europe. And Denmark will also participate and cooperate in this important work. And we will especially have a focus on these issues that I mentioned now. Protecting and promoting the rule of law and the EU's other fundamental values, both within the EU and globally. Making EU a global frontrunner on climate. Work towards a just and green economic recovery. Ensuring an effective, competitive, socially inclusive and sustainable internal market and facilitating the digital transition of the EU. Managing migration challenges. Building up a comprehensive security, including by fighting terrorism. Working to secure that EU is a strong and credible global actor. And promoting a rules-based approach across the board, both within the EU and externally, by upholding rules within the EU and promoting rules-based cooperation, multilateralism, and free trade at a global level. Denmark is committed to the discussions in the upcoming conference, but we do believe that what Europe first and foremost must focus on now after the COVID pandemic is creating growth and modernizing our societies. We must implement, enforce, and deliver results to the benefits of our societies and citizens. Thank you.
Thank you, Excellency Ambassador. I am very excited, with your speech. And, this really confirms that the community can be diversified, not uniform. And you proved, in basically that speech, that the Denmark is a very, close member of the European Union. Denmark likes Europe, likes the community, European community. But after opting out this many areas, is happy. The economy is strong. The kind of organization of the country in the area of, justice makes, from my point of view, more efficient social model and more efficient economic model. Because myself as an economist, we know that how much, a system of justice impacts the efficiency of the economy. And this is a very important thing. So I really appreciate your speech. And I think, any considerations about the strengthening of the European Union can go into that direction, that according to the certain specificities of the countries, we need to have, according to subsidiarity principles, have some certain, specific, rules which cannot be, taken off. The rules which are not only our choice, the rules are bringing us to higher quality of the social model in a particular nations and a particular country, and as well to a more efficient economic model. According to basically economic principles, if you would like to have, and you show that, if you would like to have a very strong economy in the European Union, first of all, you need to have a strong national economies. So the entire European community is composed of the national economies. If you do not have a strong national economies, the entire European economy will be very weak. And Denmark, showed that and proved that. So really, I think we can draw from, from Denmark, from your presentation, many conclusions and try to basically promote that. And as well, Excellency, you indicated you take part in the debate conference on the future of Europe. Thank you very much indeed, because our conference, our debate is just debate on the future of Europe. And I noticed today how many of you showed and presented some certain proposals, very interesting one. And I would be very happy if you, all speakers, ambassadors, we get joint forces to prepare a report at the very end of the year. Together, all basically authors can put their contribution so that out of that debate bring some certain added value. So let's switch now, to the Professor Tomasz Grosse, who is a professor of the university, Warsaw University. Thank you, Excellency, Ambassador from Lithuania. Thank you very much indeed. You sent your greetings to your country, to your government, you know, to your president, and all citizens of our great neighbor, Lithuania. Good luck. Thanks a lot. So Professor Grosse is as well a member of the high-level group on the European democracy in the European Committee. And we asked you to just extend your speech on a topic like, rephrase in the following way as a question: how much the Lisbon Treaty moved European Union towards the superstate? What was against the direction promoted by Schuman? So Schuman was against the superstate. And do you think the Lisbon Treaty brought us closer to the superstate? What is your opinion? So Professor Grosse, floor is yours, please.
Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, it's great honor for me to participate in this debate. I would like to speak today on the contemporary challenges of European integration. As Mr. Chairman said in my invitation presentation, that I'm a member of a high-level group on European democracy, working for Committee of the Regions. It is very important for me to focus basically on the problem of European democracy, or the democracy in Europe. Europe is facing many crises, and the pandemic is deteriorating the economic as well as political situation in the EU. In Europe, we have also witnessed so-called democratic deficit, which means that diverse problems related to democracy during the processes of European integration. After 12 years of introducing the Treaty of Lisbon, we could assume that in fact, the democratic deficit in the EU is even larger than 12 years ago. In my opinion, three factors are responsible for the deterioration of the situation with European democracy. First of all, we can see increasing centralization of management in the EU, which is related or triggered by successive crises and the need to deal with them. This is clearly limited the competences, powers of the member states, and thus the powers of voters in the member states and the powers of national democracies deteriorate as well. EU institutions, such as the European Commission or the Court of Justice of the EU, constantly extend the powers of European institutions, sometimes even bypassing or violating European treaties, which of course is particularly interesting from the point of view of breaching the rule of law in Europe. So the first factor important for my argument is growing centralization of management in the EU. Secondly, we can observe as well the political power in the EU, which is focused or increasingly concentrated in two largest member states, France and Germany. And why it is a problem for democracy in Europe. Of course, we can say that the increasing influence of France or Germany is for sure positive for democracy in Germany and France, and influence of Germans and French society or French and German voters during integrational processes. But at the same time as the powers of France and Germany increase, we can observe deterioration of influence of other member states, smaller, less influential on the level of European institutions. So in the same time we can say that the influence of voters at democratic procedures in smaller member states clearly are decreasing. Are clearly decreasing. So in this way, the European integration could constrain domestic electorates in less influential member states. And third factor, which is, in my opinion, responsible for growing deficit, democratic deficit in the EU, is related to particular feature of political landscape in European institutions, particularly in European Parliament. We observe political mobilization of left-wing and liberal political forces, which are trying to monopolize the political landscape in Europe. So in this kind of approach, the only left-wing and liberal values are recognized as true European. And for instance, the conservative and Christian democratic values are a little bit marginalized. Conservative and Christian democratic parties are those stigmatized as Eurosceptic, populist, and authoritarian. This serves not only to discourage voters from voting for the conservative right groupings, but also to exclude those politicians from the debate and from influencing the fate of further integration. In my personal view, such approach to monopolize political landscape by left-wing or liberal political forces is undemocratic. In this way, the democratic political debate is limited, and groups or politicians that represent alternative vision of European integration based on, for instance, Christian values or conservative values are more and more often sanctioned or are being excluded from political debate about Europe's future. And what is even more important, establishing situation or having situation of no alternative, political alternative in politics, also related to further European integration, in my opinion, is going to deprive voters of choice. Therefore, it is simply limiting democracy in Europe. So how can we counteract this phenomena? For me, it is crucial to improve democracy in the EU, to adhere to one of the most important European principle, principle which clearly relates to Roman Schuman legacy, which is subsidiarity. It is why I think we should look for ways to make the EU more subsidiary. Firstly, and most important, subsidiarity should mean that the EU will not over-centralize power and leave the member states sufficient freedom so that national communities and national democracies can still make decisions according to their preferences. So we have to rather broaden the scope of autonomy for national democracies than systematically constrain the national powers and what is added to this process, constrain the scope for national voters to decide. Our goal should therefore not to be centralization of management in the EU, even when we're facing major crisis situations and this kind of difficulties. But we should rather prefer, at least in some fields of public policies, decentralization of management, which also could lead to respecting national competence and national constitutional orders.
Pani doktor Ewa Salkiewicz, prosimy, żeby pani nie udostępniała ekranu, bo nie widzimy pana profesora.
Proszę pan zakończyć udostępnianie.
Proszę bardzo, panie profesor. Jak to zrobić? Tam ten telefon macie do pani, też zadzwońcie szybciutko. Panie profesorze, so Professor Grosse, go ahead. So they are going to...
Yes, I'm sorry, I'm trying to go to my conclusion.
No, now it's okay. Yeah, excuse me, just technical issues. Go ahead.
So let me repeat the first solution, the first conclusion should be to increase the scope for autonomy of national democracies. And secondly, my second remark and advice would be to counteract the growing, I would say, ideologization in the EU, which means the growing importance and monopoly, in fact, for only one political family values. I mean, left-wing or liberal ones. A democratic debate cannot be closed under the slogan of Europeanization or in defense of the EU. We shouldn't approve the only one political line or political recipe for European wars. An attempt to introduce an ideological monopoly in Europe may not only kill democracy in the EU, in my view, but also could be counterproductive for further European integration. So it is clearly very dangerous and difficult idea to sustain or support, buttress the only one political values during European integration processes. So thank you very much for your attention, and I hope my remarks could mobilize you for your own commentary and thoughts. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Grosse, for your very concrete indications and recommendations of a different type to our discussion. And now I invite Mr. Alexander Kulitz, a member of the Bundestag. We are happy to have you at our debate. And I would appreciate if you just, share the opinion about what is perception of people in Germany on needs for adjustment in model of European Union, so that not to lose the model of European community created by Schuman, Adenauer, and de Gasperi. So, Mr. Kulitz, the floor is yours, please.
Well, thank you very much, Professor, and also thanks for having me here today and trying to. I was listening very attentively to many of these speeches, and I'm very happy that I can directly also respond to the thesis of Professor Grosse, of Thomas Grosse, who was just speaking. Indeed, looking at the German population, I think there has been a shift in the approach towards Europe. I'm not talking about the political society, I'm more or less talking about the public, about the people, and about the young people. And let me just quickly pick up on one of the theses that that Professor Grosse just put up in the end, stating about the ideological monopoly that he is seeing within the left and liberal winged political thing going on. And it's not going on in Europe, I would suggest. It's going on all over in different countries. We have the same phenomenon also in Germany. And there is a risk, and this is also looking at Europe, if there is a refrain from the democratic idea of open speech, of freely speaking and also discussing, democratically discussing issues, then you might very well face a troubling time. And this is, I think, a process that's not only going on in Germany, it's going on all over. I disagree when it comes to the fact that Germany and France, which are probably over the last decade, have become more influential on the European level. This might, in the EU, this might very well be true, but it did not lead to the fact that the people in France or in Germany therefore are more agreeing on the European Union as a system. And why am I saying this? Well, if you look at the movement from the left, especially from the very far right and the Eurosceptic movements, in Germany, the Alternative for Germany, AfD, but also in France, the Front National, and then later on the Rassemblée, those are parties who reject kind of a further political integration of the European Union. And definitely they have been growing. I mean, the fact that Macron and En Marche came into power in France, in my personal opinion, was more of preventing Front National and Marine Le Pen in those times because they became very powerful. And we kind of had the same tendency also in Germany. Of course, the last election took place in a very, in a special crisis when we had a lot of issues due to the migrant crisis. And that obviously led to a very, very strong election campaign of the right-wing party of the AfD. But once again, those are very anti-European powers, and we have them in almost every member state. So putting up the question that was also posed several times at the beginning, what would Schuman have done? What would Schumann's ideas be on all of this? Well, first of all, we can't ask him anymore, unfortunately, because he's not here with us anymore. But times have changed, and I think yes, he's watching us, but not the conference digitally, probably. Oh, definitely. But I think times have changed, and I think we've heard several times already today that Brussels has moved away from the people, and that Europe is all about the people. And Schumann's idea was that, I think Professor Salkiewicz-Muleni, I'm not sure if I pronounced it right.
Yes.
You stated it several times that Schumann's idea was about the human. It was about the people living in Europe. So looking at the 21st century, many things have changed, and we definitely have to reconsider what Europe is supposed to be in the future. This is why I've heard a lot of skepticism also about the idea of the future of Euro conference and a Congress kind of. Yes, probably it's true to be a little bit skeptical on the outcome, but I think it's the right approach, because how else would we want to get Brussels closer to the people? How else do we really want to engage the people of Europe? And of course, we can very much rely on the national states and on the idea of national states and the idea of member states. I don't think it'll lead to a further integration of the European Union. Why am I saying this? Well, let me look at Germany and the development of Germany a little bit. Germany is not, it might be the biggest member state within the European Union and the most economically strong state, but Germany is not, it's not a national state if you compare it to Lithuania, if you compare it to other small states. Why? There's so many states within this federal construction of Germany. If you look at Bavarians, they all wear lederhosen, they celebrate their own, the Oktoberfest, and they have a completely different culture than if you look at the people in Hamburg. Hamburg, the humor is different, etc. If you look at the people in Cologne, they have a carnival, whereas usually the Bavarians, they don't understand what the people in Cologne are doing in February. It's a completely different culture. And of course, Germany is a little bigger than probably smaller states like Luxembourg or others. But on the other hand, or Denmark, I think that was very interesting. But on the other hand, this cultural mix, if you, whoever you ask within Germany where he comes from, he will probably reply, I'm from Bavaria, I'm from Hamburg, I'm from Cologne, wherever. But once you ask him outside of Europe, he'll always say, I'm German. So why are people, or why are citizens in Europe not stating I'm from Europe? If I ask them in the United States or in China, where are you from? They usually tell me I'm from Denmark, I'm from France, I'm from Poland, I'm from wherever I'm from. They don't say I'm European, whereas the Germans outside of Germany, they will always reply I'm German. They don't say I'm European either. So where's the issue? I think in Germany, everybody considers himself also to be regionally kind of a part of, I'm from Swabia, a very small kind of tribe in the southwest, close to Stuttgart, economically very strong, nice area. But I culturally, I don't identify myself at all with the people from northern Germany. I rather identify myself with Austrians, with Swiss people, or even with Polish people, because they tend to, like if you look at the cuisine, for example, the food is more or less with dairy products. It's completely different to the north of Germany. The humor is the same. So it's more of a question of where do I socialize more quickly? And I think this is a task where also Schuman would have looked like nowadays in the 21st century, looking about Europe. So how do we change Europe? How do we redefine Europe? And how do we get Brussels closer to the people? So the challenge is much more, I believe, looking into the needs and necessities, especially of the young people, especially of those generations coming up. What do they expect Europe to be? There were many challenges that Schuman didn't have to address in his times, and they had other challenges. They definitely didn't have a challenge on digitalization because it didn't exist in the 1950s. They definitely had other challenges than only the Green Deal kind of ecological challenges that are now arising, and they are not arising only because there's some heads of states thinking that this is the most important topic. It's mainly because it comes from a new generation. And I personally, I'm very skeptic about that movement we had in Germany, or we still have, Fridays for Future, Greta Thunberg, and I think many member states have the same issues. And talking to my colleagues on in the United Kingdom and asking them about how they deal with it, they actually look at me, Fridays for Future, we didn't have any issues with that, but we had something even more radical called, what were they called, some other very radical organization. Therefore, the people in Great Britain, they never followed this very radical movement. Whereas in Germany, even a lot of the movement of the Fridays for Future movement became so strong, it actually forced Angela Merkel, it forced the government, it forced all of the parties to more or less go along with these demands of this movement. Now, once again, things have changed. Now we have a pandemic. which is a threat to all of us. So suddenly the ecological topics and the political decision, they became less important in our political debates, at least in the German parliament, because now we have completely different debates. And once again, we see how important Europe gets. And once again, we see how we failed also in Germany, how we failed to be European. We closed down the borders right away. We started not supporting other countries at the beginning of the pandemic last year in March with masks, with equipment, with personal equipment. No, we rather were scared that we do not have enough protective masks ourselves. So rather than helping out countries like Italy and France, who by then already had a worse situation than we did, we kind of closed down borders and said, nope, we're not going to send them any equipment at the moment. So how far did we go even on the academic level when it comes to Europe? We failed. We completely failed. So what are the learnings out of this? And I think people, and especially the German public, is very much divided. There's many blaming why would Germany act so anti-European on the national level, and others are actually calling for more nationalistic thinking and saying, well, that's not a European issue. First, you are our government, you have to help the Germans rather than helping out the Europeans. And that's where it becomes very egoistic. And we had the topic of egoistic several times already. And I think this is where Schuman comes in, because Schuman was a very visionary thinker. He tried to overcome this kind of egoistic approach, saying, yes, all of us, we have we have our own specific cultural, national kind of identity, and we really want to keep that, and we really need to keep that because that's what makes Europe strong. On the other hand, the identification now in the 21st century with Europe should be, I believe, a completely different one than it was in 1950s when we had these founding fathers of the European Union thinking this very visionary idea. But it's a process. And if we look at the process, it's not about the founding people, what their idea was. It's about what the idea will become over time. So what we really have to do nowadays is very closely look at what do Europeans want of Europe and the European Union to be in the future. And we're lacking this process because we're lacking the political involvement of the people. And we've heard that several times already, in that the democratic process in Europe is getting worse and worse. We have less people electing, so we do need an electoral reform. The question is, how do we want the electoral reform? And is that up to the heads of states to decide? Or do we really want to listen to the people, especially the newer generations, and ask them, what do you expect from Europe to be in the future? So one thing is for certain, and we've heard that several times. There is a huge lack of reform, the demand of reform, and we need to do something very, very drastically in Europe so we can continue in the future. Europe has become very, very inflexible, very bureaucratic, and very difficult to explain. And also, I'm refraining Thomas Grosse once again. I think the question of subsidiarity, it has been violated. It has been violated. I can't put it in another sense because sure, if we want to look at a supranational kind of ensemble of countries, then we definitely have to find a way where the powers lie. And that's, I think, one of the reasons why at some point the British and just didn't have any other choice anymore but saying, guys, we have to leave this European Union because it contradicts completely to our liberal ideas, and the UK always has been way more liberal than most of the mainland European countries. It contradicts these ideas, and I am personally very sad that we didn't hear that warning. I mean, we know why the British left the European Union, and they had a huge hustle in Great Britain because a vast majority, even of the young people, they would rather still be members of the European Union than just leave. And looking at the huge debates that we have and the huge issues that now arise also with the Brexit, that should be a warning to Europe. That should be a signal to us, and that should very much show us where we're heading to. I think another way smaller warning, we had one yesterday. Yesterday, Switzerland had a visit in Brussels. They were negotiating with the president of the Commission. And the question was whether there is a way of saving the agreement with Switzerland and Europe. Well, honestly, I don't see that it will happen. But it's not only a fault of the Swiss people because they are so nationalistic or whatever. No, it's also a fault to the Europeans because we are not flexible enough anymore. We are not willing to also at some point redefine what Europe is supposed to be. And it's not like, even though I'm a politician, it's not like I have the ideas or I know what it should be or what I have some ideas that I really want to market for, that I want to go out and tell the people, this is what I believe, this is what could be good. But if people take a different decision, if people think otherwise, and it's nothing that we can decide in Germany and France, being the two big nations, it's something we have to decide in Portugal, in Poland, in Lithuania, in Estonia, in all over, in Denmark. And this is, I think, the process that where we really, really have to go through, what we really have to look at. So looking at Germany, because that was the initial question, what do people think of Europe? Well, for one, they are disappointed that the subsidiarity does not work at all. So we have a lot of regulation coming from Brussels most of the time, and that's why we are not being very honest on the media to German people. Very often, those are pieces of legislation that we could not pass on a national level because we just didn't get it through Parliament. So we pushed it up to the European level. The European level actually gave it back down to us, and we just claimed as national politicians, oh, sorry, we can't do anything about it. It's actually from Europe, so we just have to comply with it. And there's lots of stuff coming like that. I'm looking at the things like the supply chain law that might arise very well from Europe very soon, and those kind of things about and there's and that's kind of where people in Germany tend to get very skeptical about whether it's still the right European Union, whether it's still that we have to define what the glass bulb has to look like, or if it's just subsidiarity is not taken seriously anymore. And that's also fault to Germany, but also France, which is a way more centralized kind of ideology politically than we are. But also, yes, we all go along with it because we have this elite, this European elite, definitely in Brussels, that also, takes the power. If asked to, they take the power, and of course they try to do so. So where do I see the challenge? Well, first of all, if you look at the Lisbon Treaty, or there have been some improvements, absolutely. I think the next necessities of reforms are much more also constitutional wise. So if we want to take subsidiarity really serious, then first of all, we have to clearly define, and we try to do that several times already, but we have to define clearly what are the options. And we do have new challenges. We were talking about the security issues. I think it was His Excellency Borisov, that was from Lithuania, that was taking these tasks up. It's not possible to talk about a sovereignty in Europe and to talk about global security issues if, on the other hand, we're not willing to give up sovereign power on the national levels on foreign affairs. So it's kind of a bit of a schizophrenic that trade is already a European thing, that we decide on it on the European level, whereas foreign affairs is still a national thing. If we look at the global shift all over, how do we manage foreign affairs issues in the 21st century? Most of them are done by with sanctioning, with trade restrictions. Those are the kind of foreign affairs issues that we have most of the time. I'm leaving out Putin at the moment. I'm leaving out the security issues we have in the Ukraine. But if we look at China and America, it's a trade war. So how come we in Europe decide that trade is a European matter, but the national foreign affairs issues are still done by the national foreign ministers? It's not going to work out. So even if we have a high representative, we really have to consider at some point making him a commissioner, giving him some more power to really, even if some countries probably do not completely or fully agree with where we're moving at. And this will be a huge challenge, especially with China. So those are new challenges that we have to really much look at on a constitutional level, redefining what Europe should be. But we have to give power back to the national states if we still want to stick to the model of national states. There's different ideas also in Europe, and I'm very interested what the youth says about it. I mean, there's this idea, I've heard it from people from Catalonia, of Europe, of, how did they call it? I'm not quite sure about the English. the regional Europe. I mean, there is things to it. I mean, so why should it be a decision of heads of states, of political elites in Brussels? Those decisions have to be taken by the citizens. So that's why I'm a strong believer in this idea of the future of Europe, even though I'm myself quite skeptical about the outcome. But let's try it. If we don't try it, we won't see where we're going to.
Okay, thank you for your very interesting contribution, in very short time. So now I would appreciate, to speak Professor Pablo de la Fuente, but just, the professor is a kind of a disputant in that debate. So are you there, Professor?
Yes. Oh, wait.
Yeah. So, Professor, yes. Excuse me, you get not more than 10 minutes time. Right. And my question, to you would be, is there anybody who is there anybody in Europe who likes to create a superstate? And if there is anybody, just say who it is. So yes. Go ahead.
My answer is this will not be available in short or I think in medium term. It's not possible in the point of view of politics. Why? I want to start my speech about the figure of Emilio Benzo. Emilio Benzo was the heir of Cavour, was the prime minister of the Piedmont, and he is the father of the Italian Union. He is an expert in this kind of union of states. Cavour said that with an absolute power, a donkey can rule easily. Well, perhaps now in Europe we have a lot of donkeys, but the problem is that we don't have an absolute donkey. This is the key point of the question. There are not an absolute power, and it is something, well, more than an absolute power, we don't have inside the European Union. Mrs. Eva, please, could you?
Go ahead, Professor.
Yes, in this case, as Professor Kovacs said, the origin of the European structure was a union of partners, was a union of primus inter pares. He do the comparison of Luxembourg with Germany. Well, a process of union needs a leader, and the idea of Schuman is against this strong leadership. It's against that, because always in the process of Germany, this is Bismarck with Prussia as leader. In the process of Italy was the kingdom of the Piedmont, led by Cavour and the King Vittorio Emanuele. But here no, after 3 wars for the hegemony in Europe, first of all, instead the idea of hegemony, the idea of Schuman is partnership. And in other point of view, well, this is the idea of Schuman, but an anti-Schuman idea can be possible in Europe? I think no, because the main political actor in Europe nowadays is Germany. The process of unification of the European Union has some parallels with the German Union. It starts by the Zollverein, a union of customs. Well, translated nowadays is the idea of the euro. But the military force of Prussia during the 19th century is not the same than Germany today. Nowadays, the Bundeswehr, the Federal Army of Germany, has a lot of problems and has a volume of forces with the same number of brigades that armies like Spain of. And when the Belgian politician Marquis Einstein said that Europe nowadays, Europe is an economic giant, a political war and a military war, we can translate the word Europe to Germany. Watch for example, what is nowadays the foreign policy of Germany lead the European Union? Zero. I think it's an internal problem this is an internal problem. The big problem of Europe for this idea of the super state is that Germany don't want to be the hegemonic actor of the process. And for example, Ambassador Saukiewicz talked about the question, the point of view of the cultural aspects. Why nowadays, after the Brexit, now, today, we are talking in English? Why? Because the idea of Schuman is share Europe between Germans and French. And nowadays, the English is an element of balance, like Brussels is an element of balance. The leadership of Europe is not in Paris, is not in Bonn in the time of Adenauer, it's in Brussels. If you compare, it's the same problem that nowadays in America has Mercosur. The countries of South America copy and paste the model of the European Union for Mercosur, and was the same. The two main partners of Mercosur are Brazil and Argentina, and the capital in Mercosur is in the South American Belgium, a small country called Uruguay, and the capital town is Montevideo. Practically, the European Union will not be a super state by the same reasons, not exactly, but some reasons that Mercosur will not be a platform for a union of the Ibero-American countries, something that those countries needs strongly. Well, another point, perhaps, of my argumentation is that how I watch the European Union in the future. I watch like a forum of cooperation and mutual help between different states. It's the only future, the freedom to be. I have 1 minute and I finish. I think European Union, I put a Polish example. It's like a Biedronka. It's a place where the people, different people can buy spaghetti or tomato sauce or milk or chocolate. But perhaps someone will buy chocolates, another spaghetti, and another mineral water. The most important idea of Europe is finish the idea, finish the idea of war between the European states and be a meeting point for the cooperation, but not a uniform idea, must be a multilateral forum of cooperation. Perhaps, I don't know, for agriculture, Spain and France has the same interest, but in order to share the European funds, Spain can be associated with Italy and Poland in order to reduce the influence of the of Paris and Berlin. Yeah? And this is my contribution in this conference. I don't know. I don't know what it happens in the future. I'm a historian. I'm not a wizard, but I think that a European super-state is a serious risk for the liberty of the Europeans. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor de la Fuente, Pablo de la Fuente. You know, this is a very, interesting and a specific and original, contribution. I didn't see that, kind of approach and consideration in our today debate. So this is really very good contribution. Thank you, and stay with us. And now we ask, Professor David Reichert, an American, US point of view. So we are really happy to have you, David, because now we just get a distance and make a look what you as an American perceive that whole story we are talking about today. Go ahead, floor is yours, David.
Great, thank you very much. I hope everybody can hear me okay. I'm going to turn up the sound here just a little bit, so it should be better. Okay. I would like to talk a little bit today about comparison of the European Union and the United States of America. It's interesting in the context of what we've been talking about, the Treaty of Lisbon, and this idea of a European superstate versus the Schuman concept of a community of nations. And I'd like to start with a few comments about the United States federal system. Well, I would say, first of all, it's very interesting that the states of the United States of America today in the US federal system are not actually represented in Washington. A lot of people don't know that, but the states are not represented in Washington. For example, the state of Colorado is not represented. Rather, the people of Colorado are represented in that they directly vote for their senators, for example, their US senators, and those senators then go to Washington. But those senators are not directly representing the government of Colorado, which, Colorado has a government as do all the 50 states. So that's interesting. Now, this was not always the case. For the first 125 years of the existence of the United States, the US Senate was represented by American state governments. The governments, actually, of the legislatures of the separate states, they selected their U.S. senators. So there was a connection there between those governments of the separate states and the senators in Washington. Now, this changed in 1913 with a constitutional amendment to the U.S. Constitution, which gave the direct election of U.S. senators to the people. And, this is kind of interesting. There's a little bit of an interesting parallel here with the history of European integration. As you all know, being experts on the EU, in 1979, of course, the European Parliament, they dropped this system of appointees, of members of the EP being appointed by the member states, and they went with direct elections to the European Parliament. Now, you might say, well, what's wrong with this? Isn't this democracy? Isn't this what we want more of in America and the European Union? Well, I would say this is something really to think about, and whether or not this was really going in the direction of Robert Schumann's vision of a community of nations. In the United States, what has happened, because we have direct elections to the National Congress, the special interests have become very involved in these elections with big money and lobbying these members of the U.S. Congress. Whereas formerly, when these members were controlled, at least in the Senate, by the separate state governments, there was much less of this activity. This might be simply a fact of modern life today, but still it's something interesting to think about. This spread of democracy, the spread of a direct democracy and some of the negative side effects of this. Well, okay, let's leave that just for a second. In my opinion, the Treaty of Lisbon further watered down the role of the member states in the European Union by making a number of structural changes. Now, again, you're all aware of these changes, being experts on the EU, but I'll just mention a few of them for our conversation. The Prime Minister of the country holding the rotating presidency of the Council of the EU is no longer chairman of those European Council meetings. Of course, that's now done by this president. And the foreign minister of that country that's holding the rotating presidency is no longer representing the EU externally. And that's now done, of course, by this so-called High Representative for Foreign and Security Policy, currently Mr. Borrell. Second, the Charter of Fundamental Rights is interesting. Now, of course, this enshrines certain rights for EU citizens, and currently it only applies when it intersects with EU law. But there is worry that this may change in the future and that member states may be held accountable for their domestic law that does not intersect EU law in relative to the Charter of Fundamental Rights. A third, and now we get to one of the big changes, as you all know, of the Treaty of Lisbon, change with the Council of the European Union and the voting. It's specifically going from unanimity to qualified majority voting in most areas now, except, as I understand, taxation and foreign policy. Well, this certainly further undermines the role of the member states. The Council of the European Union no longer really has that veto power that it used to have. In fact, I believe it now takes a coalition of at least four, a minority coalition of at least four member states to block some activity in the Council. And then, of course, we come to the big one, the changes in the European Parliament made by the Treaty of Lisbon. And we all know that the European Parliament was the big winner in the power game of the transfer of power in the Treaty of Lisbon. The European Parliament gained greatly increased co-decision powers in almost all areas of policy. And they already, of course, had significant powers in that they could, they had to approve commission. They still have to approve commission members. They also have great authority over the EU budget, and they have to agree largely with international agreements. Lisbon also, as we know, capped the number of MEPs at 750, and now that's gone down to 705, but still that's a ridiculously high number of members. 705 members of a parliament is unbelievable. Yeah, unbelievable. I just couldn't imagine America working like. Now, America only has 535. Anyway, okay. Now, as we know, these MEPs are not grouped according to member state. They're not representing their member states. They're grouped ideologically. They're representing certain party groupings. And so again, the member state is really not represented here. Now, okay, let's just stop here just for a second and ask the question. Many people would ask, well, what's wrong with that? What's wrong with more democracy? You know, we talk about the democratic deficit all the time. Isn't that a good thing? I mean, isn't it a good trend that this is all becoming more democratic? Well, I would just like to pose the consideration that it's not necessarily a good thing, especially in the context of Robert Schuman and this idea of a community of nations. It's not a good thing if member state representation has been diminished in this process. Now, MEPs, as we know, are directly elected by European citizens. These citizens are not representing their member states. And in fact, I would say that these MEPs are not even elected by citizens of Europe. They're elected by a tiny handful, a minority, usually under 50% of eligible voters in Europe. which really begs the question, you know, who is controlling these members? Well, very similar to the US Congress, what happens, what you see special interest groups moving into the void and controlling more and more the agenda of the members of the European Parliament. Just some statistic, I think Slovakia, where I'm living, still unfortunately holds the all-time low turnout for a European parliamentary election at 17%. But I have to say it's much better in Slovakia now. So they're doing a much better job here. So, you know, I guess what I want to say is that these members of the European Parliament, who are they loyal to? Well, it's certainly not member states. They're loyal to their ideological groupings and special interests. And this is a big problem. And I'll give you an example here, a recent example based on my interests. The pressure that has been recently put, at least in 2020, toward the end of 2020, on members of the European parliamentary committees by interest groups like Marie Stopes International, which lobby the EU heavily with big money on advancing abortion and so-called reproductive rights, directly against the interests of certain member states, particularly Poland, Slovakia, Malta, and others, which do not recognize these so-called rights. In the United States, again, once the Senate was unleashed by attachment to the member states, and we went with direct elections of the U.S. Senate, the interest groups moved in a very similar way. And along the lines of this particular issue, the Planned Parenthood organization is extremely strong in the United States in lobbying the U.S. Senate for a furthering of so-called abortion rights. In fact, in 2020, a European parliamentary paper issued at the request of the Parliamentary Committee on Women's Rights and Gender Equality criticized Slovakia as an EU member state that should ensure more access to safe and quality sexual reproductive health care. That's quote from them. But what in the world was the legal basis for that report, for that paper? Nobody really knows. It's very ideological and obviously motivated very strongly by lobbying special interest groups. Okay, so I come to the conclusion of these comments. What are some recommendations? Well, I don't think that the European Union necessarily needs more democracy. I think there's probably enough democracy. I think what we need to do is go back to more member state representation if we want to get back to the community of nations concept of Robert Schuman. In fact, I would argue that the Council of the European Union needs, in the next treaty, needs to reclaim some control over policy over the Parliament, especially more areas of unanimity voting in the Council of the European Union. And hopefully, if that becomes a reality, the Council of the European Union in the future will become a European Senate that can check and control the members of the lower house of European Parliament. And hopefully in that sense, Robert Schuman's dream will be fulfilled. So those are my observations, and I thank all of you very much for your attention, and I look forward to the rest of our discussion today.
Thank you very much, Professor Reichert. Yeah, that was a great, remarks, a fresh, fresh view from basically United States, and really you you shed some lights on very new lights, I would say, and again, it get me you delivered many ideas on the reform of the European Union. Basically, the purpose of that debate is just to renew the European Union, and you indicated some directions for that purpose. So now I would like, to ask Rodrigo Ballestar, Mr. Rodrigo Ballestar, to speak about the critical analysis of the negative and positive outcomes of Lisbon Treaty and what changes are needed. So, Mr. Ballestar, the floor is yours, and you get 15 minutes, not more.
No worries. I will stick to that. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
So, first of all, I will still invest 1 minute of my precious time to thank you. It's really a pleasure. So thank you, Professor Krysiak, and also the Schumann Institute for Ideas, and also the Václav Felzak. We are very happy here in the Matthias Corvinus Collegium in Budapest to be part also of this debate. And thank you, because your debate is also very relevant in the current context, and basically in the week where we celebrated the 70th anniversary of the Schumann of the coal and steel community. Let me just briefly introduce myself. I'm now in Budapest. I'm the head of the Center for European Studies at the Matthias Corvinus Collegium. But before that, and until very recently, I was an European official. I was an EU technocrat. I spent 17 years in Brussels in the Parliament, first of all, but mostly in the European Commission. I was also, my last job there was working in the cabinet of the Hungarian Commissioner, Mr. Navracsics. So if you don't mind, I will speak today with my practitioner hat, as somebody who spent enough time in the lobbies of the European Commission, and who had still, a bit of time to think about it. Let me also be a bit, provocative. After 17 years, where I had to stick a bit to the line, I'm now happy to speak as a free citizen, or almost a free citizen. So the theme you assigned me is the critical analysis of negative and positive outcomes of the Lisbon Treaty. I will change it maybe a bit. Let me be a bit academic at the beginning. I will behave like a good student. And if you want me to list some negative and positive ones, let me start with the positive. I think maybe that this permanent presidency of the European Council, well, maybe I disagree with the previous speaker. I think it's a good idea, because it gives indeed like a permanent, and a sense of permanency to the institution that really represents the best interests of the member states, which is the Council of the European Council. I also would mention the simplification of the qualified majority. I like pretty much this 55-65% rule, and the 55% of countries. I think this is really the best possible balance that we could find. I also welcome the more important role of national parliaments thanks to Lisbon, although it's really not enough. I like the strengthening of the méthode communautaire. I like it. I must say that the co-decision for me is a legal miracle, and it's not a bad way to put 450 million people, together and agreeing on sometimes very technical things. On the negative side, well, I think the best example is probably the EU's external representation, especially after the very pathetic incident in Ankara. I would also mention among the negative developments, the Charter of Fundamental Rights, and there actually I very much agree with my predecessor. It's a very personal opinion, but again, I don't think it's a very good idea that the EU puts its nose on a potentially aspect that could, fall within the domestic policy of member states. Citizenship initiative is also another one of the failures of the Lisbon Treaty. This is nothing more than a slogan, basically. But my main problem with Lisbon is that, let's not forget the genesis of Lisbon. It is basically the son of a crisis already. Lisbon was the plan B of the huge crisis of the European Constitution that was refused by France and the Netherlands, and probably some others, although some others already agreed on it. And so Lisbon is basically the plan B, and the plan B that looks very much like the plan A, and then many people had to swallow, although they already refused it. And I think that today we are still facing, the consequences of this political crisis. And so this is something that we have to keep in mind. And also the problem with the Lisbon Treaty, that it was already a plan B for a crisis, and then it became the treaty for all the other crises that came. And as some speakers already mentioned, Mr. Kovac, for example, the last 15 years of the European Union have been a succession of crises. It didn't stop. It was a decennius horribilis, or whatever you can name it like that. And it was again, a treaty that showed that in times of crisis, the EU now is not fit for, its purpose. And coming back to the title of the presentation that you gave me, if I focus only on those negative and positive sides, I have the impression I will miss the purpose of my presentation, especially the purpose of your own event, Professor. when I look at the agenda, what you want to discuss today is what about nations? Is the federalist way the only way? What about the superstate? And also what about the tergiversation of Schumann's idea? Because it seems that the more we invoke him, especially in Brussels, the less we follow his vision. And so what I think is really fascinating about the event that you put up today is that you are refreshing, the thoughts and the name of a person that is often invoked to preach exactly the contrary of what he wanted, And also, when you speak about the Lisbon Treaty, I would like also to say that, in my view, it's not about the Lisbon Treaty. And to be more precise, it's neither about Lisbon nor about treaties, or at least less than we think. The current context, we all have it. But let me just focus, on this 17th anniversary of the coal and steel community, and actually the 71st anniversary of the Schumann's Declaration. I listened to it the other day. I showed a little video to my students. And actually, this declaration is a monument of pragmatism, It's a monument of political realism. It's very much, focus on the national interest, on the diversity, cultural, not only political, but also cultural diversity of its members. It's a small step approach. Do we have that now? I mean, 70 years later, do you think that the union we have now looks like the one Schuman, sketched in his declaration? I think the answer has already been given by quite a few speakers before me. And my impression is that more than this pragmatic and also strategic EU that we need, we rather have a messianic one that sees itself more like a moral authority, more than a political/technical entity. And I'm afraid that this vision is based on a triple denial. I have the impression sometimes that the current European Union we have is first in a denial of its own origins, of some of its core principles, and third, is also done to the detriment of diversity. Diversity now is the buzzword everyone uses uses the word and speaks about diversity, but what about political diversity? And this is again one point that several speakers stressed before me, so nothing new there. Speaking about first the origins, Well, the origins of this dérive, as we say in French, like this, let's say, distortion of the initial idea, is not to be found in Lisbon, in my view. Lisbon is nothing but the second episode, of Maastricht. And for me, the big game changer in the European Union was Maastricht. Forget about Nice, forget about Amsterdam, forget even about the single act. The moment where the European Union, decided to take this big leap forward, from an economic community to a political community was in Maastricht. And I must say that with a bit of distance, I have the impression that this is the moment where the honeymoon between Europe and its citizens ended, as if the implicit social contract that allowed this economic community, was broken when this Europe decided to switch from an economic logic to a political one. And then, if you read between the lines of Maastricht, you still have the impression indeed that, the unspoken goal of Maastricht is to have this superstate. Okay, some said, well, we were an economic giant, but a political dwarf. Okay, maybe. But, for me, this pre-Maastricht Europe, was already brilliant and subtle way, in the scale of history, to unify, to consolidate the continent. And I have the impression that this pre-Maastricht Europe disappeared from our radars, when actually it was the golden age of Europe. We should maybe don't forget that and learn a bit more from it. A denial of some core principles. I don't want to dwell too much into that because, again, some speakers spoke about it before. But what about subsidiarity? Do we have the impression that subsidiarity is actually applied properly in the decision-making process? Not sure. What about also a culture of subsidiarity? It's not only a legal principle. Subsidiarity means that sometimes the best thing that the Commission can do when it's asked about some national issues is to say it's none of my business. And they can do it. I have the impression this messianic EU is putting its nose where it has less of an added value. Why? What about another principle that is the principle of conferral of competencies? This is really basic. Basically, what belongs what is not explicitly, attributed to the European Union belongs to the member states. Well, from a legal point of view, my impression is that indeed in the legislative proposal, this is respected. But again, what about, for example, the case law of the Court of Justice, of the European Court of Justice? I mean, you read recent cases in again, aspects that are totally national where they are taking a stand. Look at, for example, the Coman case, from 2018 and several others. And another example, and then here I'm really risking my head as a former EU official, but let's do it. I don't care. Article 7. This principle of competence is Article 7, basically, and this is something that Mr. Reichert already stressed, we run the risk of, you said we run the risk, of having the EU putting its nose on all domestic matters. That happens already, Mr. Reichert. It happens with Article 7. Article 7, applies basically to everything. Then we also have, denial of political diversity. The European Union speaks a lot about values and values and values, but in a very generic way. Values matters, but being European is much more than following values that are in many other Western constitutions. And actually, go a bit, culture, maybe less, not only, at least, about values. And especially since values are permeable to ideology, and as some speakers already stressed, some of us have the impression that the EU only speaks one political language. So that might be a problem as well. I still have 3 minutes. Let me dwell now on something else, is that we speak about treaties, and now we are in the middle of this exercise that has just been launched about the future of the EU. And that means whenever we have a conference like that, half of the Brussels bubble thinks about a new treaty, about institutional changes. Well, is it about the treaties or is it about the persons? Is it about changing the car or is it about changing the pilot of the car? I will certainly not advise to change the treaties now. That will be opening Pandora's box, and then, by the way, it will take years and years and years before they are properly implemented, if not ratified. So let's be careful with that. And actually, all the things that I've been mentioning, if we want an European Union with a bigger culture of subsidiarity, with the full respect of the conferrer of competencies, with different approach from the European Court of Justice, one that, for example, is also focusing more on topics, where there is a large consensus among member states. Think about all the digital transformation. Think about artificial intelligence. Things like that, where defense, for example, to my surprise, but defense is a consensual topic about all the member states. Do we need to change the treaties? It's more on that. Focus less, for example, on minority rights. Minorities, I'm not speaking about cultural minorities, but I'm speaking about this diversity / woke / cancel culture type of minorities. Do we need to change the for that? That's definitely I hope that in this debate of the future of Europe is going to, it's a debate where the pragmatism will prevail, over, sometimes the tendency of the European bubble in Brussels, to change always the world, starting with the roof and not starting with the foundations, the laying foundations of the house. So this is a risk that we should avoid. And definitely my plea will go for a more pragmatic, strategic European Union, to forget about the messianic, tendencies that we have been living now in the last 10, 15, 20 years. Less ideology, more pragmatism, more respect for subsidiarity. And again, sometimes the best answer that the European Union can give is, sorry, but this is none of my business. This belongs actually to the member states. Many people speak about a strategic Europe. Macron, for example, speaks about the strategic Europe. And the question is, will we be more autonomous, more sovereign, the Europeans, with more sovereign member states or with less sovereign member states? This is, I think, the last question on which, I would like to debate now and probably in another occasion. That's it, I'm done. And 15 seconds ahead of my time, Mr. Pisiak.
Thank you very much. You are a very good student. So Rodrigo Balesta, Mr. Thank you very much. It was interesting, you know, point of view, somebody who worked in that Brussels administration, and now, as you said, you now free citizen. It's a very interesting statement. So it means that before you were in kind of a prison, right? So now you see what is the perception about the free citizens. I mean, the perception of free citizens about the, you know, the European Commission or all this, you know, institution. Okay.
Let's call it institutional loyalty.
This is not so much serious, but so now I just like, you know, is presented the paper of the Tadeusz Kopeć, the member of the Polish Senate. He unfortunately, as I said, you know, he has some healthy problem and he was not able to be in person. So it is going to be this paper presented now by Małgorzata, who is basically press, you know, speaker of the Institute of Schumann Thought. So Małgorzata, go ahead.
Thank you so much, Mr. Professor. Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to spend time with you and to be part. How looks like the picture of the unity at the European Union compared with the concept of servant of God, Robert Schuman? Robert Schuman, Konrad Adenauer, and Alcide de Gasperi created a united Europe as a community of European nations, where are two basic pillars, community and patriotism. This implies that model of the Europe should not be based on superstate and centralized government, but community of kind, the round table where each country has its autonomy, but as well should respect and serve other nations for common good. From that concept comes out that patriotism, as the love to own country, is the source of love to other nations. According to the Schumann, without love to own nation, it's impossible to love others. Loving own country makes impossible to hate others, and opposite, the hate to own country does not allow to love others. Robert Schuman said, "My idea is not to merge states to create a superstate. Our European states are a historical reality. From a psychological point of view, it would be impossible to do away with them. Their diversity is a good thing, and we do not intend to level them down or equalize them. To our mind, European policy is certainly not in contradiction with the patriotic ideal. It encourages the particular nature and characteristics of each of its states and fosters the sound love for one's own country, which is a love that does not go in detriment of other countries. It wants to attain a unity in the fullness of its diversity." Robert Schuman stated the concept of European community as the unity, solidarity, and peace. It means that without unity, no solidarity exists, and in consequence, this leads to the lack of peace or war. Increasing lack of solidarity between European countries and egoism is a sign of lost unity. If this situation will not be changed, then in the future, Europe may approach to the war. The turbulences which Europe experiences since many years leads to a loss of unity, solidarity, and existential peace. Currently, there are many voices coming from different sides of Europe that without renewing the European Union based on the initial Schumann's idea, the European Union may go bankrupt. Brexit was the early warning signal indicating big deficit in community spirit in EU, and if no appropriate conclusions and actions will be taken, then further continuation of such a path will destroy the initial Schumann's idea. According to many, the adoption of the Lisbon Treaty started the process of losing the independence of nation states. and it had a significant impact on limiting their sovereignty. Work on the preparation and ratification of the Lisbon Treaty has clearly shown that the EU is dominated by narrow national interests, not a coherent vision of unity, what finally took dominating trend to the model of EU as the superstate. The ratification of the Lisbon Treaty is passing on the 3rd anniversary of the death of John Paul II. Many politicians in those days directly referred to the teaching of the Polish Pope. When Poland entered the EU structures, Polish Catholics said that we can help Europe to come back to the Christian values and roots, to renew and improve the model of EU. Forgetting the Christian roots of Europe will sooner or later lead to bankruptcy of the EU. The Maastricht Treaty established the EU by removing European Economic Community, and the term community was replaced by the term union. However, fortunately, the Treaty of Lisbon did not establish state symbols of the European Union, such as the flag or anthem. According to many, the adoption of this document started the process of losing the independence of nation-states. Most countries agreed to adopt the new currency right away. The exception was Great Britain. Recognizing the tremendous centralization in the United Kingdom, the Independence Party was formed with the overriding goal of getting Britain out of the EU and regaining independence. Simply put, the ideologies of the New Left are about atomizing society, liberating it from its old ties and nationalizing all social relations. We notice that the nationalization of education, the nationalization of religion, family, and culture. When all this comes true, it will be possible to speak, in their opinion, about the creation of a new paradise on earth, following the Marxist pattern. Of course, the most important thing is to take over human consequences, consciousness, and have this decisive influence on Western culture. Hence, socialists promote, wherever they can, the neo-Marxist liberation of oppressed minorities. They call for the liberation of children from the power of parents, spouses from the bonds of the indissolubility of marriage, sexual minorities from the rule of nature. Under European and American influence, the legal possibility of abortion, euthanasia, homosexual marriage, and child adoption is introduced. Work on the preparation and ratification of the Lisbon Treaty has clearly shown that narrow national interests prevail in the EU and not a coherent vision of unity, solidarity, and peace, to which the servant of God, Robert Schuman, referred. Polish integration policy also follows this trend. Senator of Poland, Tadeusz Kopeć. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And so we are slowly approaching an end. I just would like to announce that, you know, we are broadcasting this debate to a potentially 1,100,000 subscribers on many YouTubes in Poland, abroad, Netherlands, Spain, Hungary, and where else? Lithuania, and I think Romania. And so last time on the debate, we had finally 60,000 of participants. So we hope this time will be similar. And I really appreciate, you know, the great, high quality of excellent speeches and, indicating certain directions Now I just ask just a few of you. Excuse me, we will probably not have much time, but you know, be some kind, Excellency, Mr. Ole Toft, just 3 minutes for some certain response or conclusion at this point. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you very much. It has been interesting to follow the discussion here today. Many interesting reflections and ideas. I think also it was interesting for me as a person who have been working also with EU affairs for so many, for more than 20 years, and having participated in the negotiations on both the Lisbon Treaty and but also the Amsterdam Treaty, and participated in the Convention on the Constitutional Treaty that never became a European constitution but ended up as a Lisbon Treaty. To hear these discussions, personally, I don't see any danger of the EU becoming a super state. I personally think that the courageous and right decision to enlarge the EU with all the new democracies in Central Europe in the 90s, and was meant that the size of the Union and the diversity between member states became so large that the possibilities of a very in-deep integration is not realistic, at least for the moment, in my view. The differences economically, socially, culturally between member states are simply too large. And if enlargement continues, and it will, I'm quite sure, for a certain time with also the countries in the Western Balkans, we will introduce another group of countries that will also need considerably help to grow. So I don't see a risk for such a super state in the near future. And I basically think that the problem facing Europe and the EU right now is not that the EU is too strong. It is that the EU is probably too weak, and we have to take care that it will not fall apart. Because we need it. We do not have an alternative. All European countries, even the largest European countries, are too small to succeed in the world already today. And in the second half of the 21st century, that'll be even more the case. So we need to stay together and stick together. And I believe that the challenge for the EU right now is maybe not so much to talk about further changes in our treaties, to start delivering results. We are falling behind year after year if we compare ourselves with our global competitors in the US and in East Asia. And I think looking at the last pandemic here, we have seen, I mean, if you look at the results of the pandemic, then I think it is worth noting that the EU seems, and the Europe, because it's not the EU, it's Europe, member states and the institutions as well. We have underperformed compared to the US and the developed economies in Asia on both death rates. Our death rates are higher. Our economies are worse performing, and we will start growing slower. We will fall more behind these competitors. And at the same time, we have had tougher restrictions. In some member states, children have not been in school for almost a year. And in many of these member states, the digital infrastructure is so weak that they have not been able to receive high quality distance education. And now, in the last phase here, we have even seen within a few months, the US
totally outperform us with regard to vaccinations. I think these call for considerable considerations, not on treaty changes, but simply on delivering growth, competitiveness, and results on what the citizens need. That is what we should perform and focus on. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Excellency. And Excellency Francesco Javier Sanabria, are you with us still? Excellency, Ambassador of Spain, are you with us, Excellency, Mr. Francesco Javier Sanabria? Not anymore. So just, I know he was saying that he was going to leave at a little bit early. So just, 2 minutes, I would ask, Professor Frederick Alemant, just 2 minutes, kind of a conclusion. Are you with us, Professor? I seen Professor was no
anymore.
So he left. So Excellency Eva Sałkiewicz, just 2 minutes. Could you some conclusion, please?
Thank you. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. I would like to add only something what I have exposed in my presentation, which I didn't say today, only it was in written. You have it. Why? Because this is in relation to the last presentation which was read, because the person is sick, but because I had the privilege to be at the Holy See as a chargé d'affaires, and it was a long time ago, so of course it was not so very easy to be a woman there with this position. It was in 93, 94. So I would like only to say in the Pope's words, not mine, which I published in my book about the Holy See diplomacy. And if, by the way, somebody is interested, I can send PDF in Polish or English or Italian. So I said in that book, because I wanted to know what the Pope, John Paul II, thought of the role of Poland in this process. And when I was in Rome, 10 years after I left Rome, the Pope was not alive anymore, but I met the person who was Under Secretary of State and worked for the Pope from 96 to 2013. But of course, not with our Pope. He was made Archbishop by Pope Francis. And his name is Ettore Balestrero, and he is an Italian. Actually, he is an Apostolic Nuncio to the Democratic Republic of Congo. And I was interested what's happened when the Constitution of Europe has been rejected in order to not to mention the Christian roots of Europe. So I would imagine if I were Pope, I would be very sad about it. And I asked him, what do you think what our Pope, the Polish Pope was saying about it? And he told me, and I said, did I understand well? And I sent him what I understood in order to tell you how if somebody interprets something, it can be wrong. And he told me, no, it was exactly what he said, he told me, and I said in my book in English. So I repeat now, because this is important. When the preamble with the invocation to Christ and Christian roots of Europe has been rejected to be present in the EU constitution, it provoked a reaction in many European citizens who gained a new interest in the promotion of a stronger impact of such roots in the process of the European integration. The Pope saw the role of Poland as a strong country with a deeply rooted Christian identity, which could cooperate significantly to develop the above-mentioned process in line with its identity. So that's what Mr. Rodrigo Ballester said before, and other many people. Of course, I agree with them that it has to be in line with the identity of the countries, member states, who are composed of the European Union. Otherwise, it will be always problems, and no reform, nothing can solve this problem, in my view.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Alexander Kulitz, just 1 minute. Mr. Alexander Kulitz, 1 minute, please.
I just want to thank you. I think it was great, and also hearing all these different thoughts and being able to join. So I just want to take the opportunity to thank you once again for this great occasion.
Thank you very much.
And hope to see you all in person probably sometime in the future when we're done with this pandemic.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed for your coming, you know. And Professor Attila Kovac, are you with us still, Professor?
Can you see me? Yeah, I changed my clothes, so I'm a little bit more informal now. I'm sorry about it. First of all,
40 seconds.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. I mean, it was a great exchange of views and many refreshing ideas ahead of the challenges that we are facing in Europe. I do believe that the Christian fundamentals of the continent shall be mainstreamed in the discussion that is ahead of us. I also believe that Europe should act as a truly global actor in the future. Otherwise, we will not able to keep up with the growing challenges that we are facing from the US, China, and other powerhouses of the world. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. And Professor David Reichert, 45 seconds, David.
Thank you very much for the invitation again. I really enjoyed listening to the discussion. You know, in Europe, they talk about subsidiarity. In the United States, they have a phrase, all politics is local. And so I think it's going to be increasingly difficult for the European Union to find a one-size-fits-all policy for all the member states in a wider Europe. There's going to have to be compromise. And I think what we're really going to see, we're going to see a renaissance of the member state. That's what I think. And I also, in a normative way, I hope that that's the case. But thank you again for the invitation.
Thank you, David. Thank you. Professor Grosse, 30 seconds. Professor, please. Time is just contracting.
Thank you very much for highly interesting discussion. Many interesting arguments. I know that we are witnessing some kind of tension between centralization.
Yes, Pablo de la Fuente.
Centralization, which is viewed as a way to fight the crisis. So it is understandable, for instance, in the Eurozone to increase centralistic method of management. Okay. On the other hand, we are not, we shouldn't lose some scope of maneuver for member states and member states' democracy. So, as I said, it is visible tension about constraining values and approaches, but still we shouldn't neglect national democracy, because as one of the participants said, and it is related to broader academic literature, that true democracy in Europe as well as in US is in fact not on the level of regional groupings, but it is local, or in Europe, national phenomena. So we should take into consideration this.
Thank you, Professor Grosse. I'm sorry that I am hurrying you, but because before 8 it will be cut our broadcast. So Professor de la Fuente, just 30 seconds.
Yes, thank you. An Spanish diplomat told me that a diplomat is an intellectual that his country sent to tell lies because he is a patriot. This is not true. Today I listen from the diplomats interesting truths. Thank you very much for your kind invitation, and thank you very much to my colleagues for this interesting discussion. Goodbye.
Thanks a lot. And Mr. Rodrigo Ballester, 30 seconds on the end.
Switch on microphone, please.
Microphone, Rodrigo.
Voilà. Yeah, 30 seconds or even less. First of all, to thank you. It was indeed a very interesting debate, and it was not politically correct. And only, and second, I also, take the words of Mr. Oletov, the Danish ambassador. I mean, this call for pragmatism. Now is not the moment to speak about big ideas. It's the moment to think about European citizens' growth, competitiveness, concrete added value in their lives. And if you want a strong Europe, and we certainly need a strong Europe, let's start with having, a strong internal cohesion. Let's stop fighting about things that are not necessary. Here, we have persons with very different views on issues that are not necessary to build a European community. We don't need to agree on abortion, on gay rights, on things that basically depend at the local or national level. We need to agree on things that we are going to make us stronger in the international scene. So let's make sure, that the European Union doesn't turn good neighbors into bad flatmates, I would say.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed. So thank you for all speakers, and I would, appreciate if you, after this debate, send me 1, 2, or 3 pages most, some certain, a summary of your speech. You are not forced, but you are kindly asked, okay, with conclusions, recommendations. I am happy, today, the potential, of this different, presentations was very great, Thank you very much, all, participants in the internet, in Poland, Netherlands and Hungary, Romania, what I remember as well, I think Spain. And as well, I ask all, great ambassadors who, today present, although they have many duties. And I ask all of you, to just raise the interest for next debates and ask, different YouTube platforms, media platforms to allow us broadcast around the Europe. The next debate is going to be on the 22nd of May, and the topic is Macron concept of the renewed European Union versus Schuman concept. So already today, you all are invited, and we are going to have, I think, really a very good debate. And especially, I would like thank you for the ambassador of the Kingdom of Denmark, because, that example of your country, that you, make this happen very well. And this was a very, good witness of that, what can be done, and this is real, this is working, and this is how the community can operate. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure participating. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. See you then sometime. Be in touch. We will send, as well letters, thanks letters, and as well some rewards in the letter. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure to listen to you. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Mogą wyłączać. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you. Good night.
Thank you, Mr. Kulic. So see you. I'm going to be in June in Berlin, probably, so we can, meet there, right? Meet there.